There are groups that make claims for E1B1A being a founding haplogroup among Semitic groups. Is E1B1A found in high frequencies among Semitic populations like J1? Would the ancient Arabians and Syrians and the Israelites have had high percentages of E1B1A within their populations in antiquity?
Yeah, they did, but they also had J1. So this is my opinion. So take that for what it is. I think that J1 and J2 probably were not, and I'm going to say Afroasiatic because, like the Egyptians spoke non-Semitic language, but it was Afroasiatic, like more closely related to that of the Amazigh people, the Berbers, right? So North Africa had a different branch before the Semitic, whatever. So I'll say Afroasiatic, Semitic, and whatever the other groups like Terah. And stuff. So it looks like the Natufians had it. It looks like there was a massive. Massive admixture between Western and Eastern Levant, Middle Eastern people, probably before 3000 BC, but after, let's say after like 8000 BC, somewhere like in prehistory, there was a genetic exchange, and the J's, J1, J2, seem to show up during that exchange in the Levant and the western part of the Middle East. I don't think Afroasiatic languages are from Western Iran, which is where they would come from. Therefore, I don't think. Also, like you find J2 and J's in Europe and in India. and obviously, and that's not due to Semitic migration, right? So they're ancient lineages that are in like the Indus Valley civilization, and what excuse me. So I think E is probably more likely to be Afroasiatic. And they had high frequencies in Arabians, Syrians, and Israelites.
Okay. All right.
All right, shalom family, shalom, shalom. So let's do a little review today. So just to show a little appreciation for the truth. I think it's always good to talk about truth. So fair use. I seen a channel. Obviously, I'm keeping watching them because channels like this claim to be an educational channel, right? I think, for example, a lot of people know that the practice of like eugenics and stuff like that is, if you know about it, you know about it. But I think incorrect information should be addressed, right? Especially if it's said scientific, right? Let me just point out something here. This interesting video doesn't actually give you origins, but that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to use this because what this video actually is, I think is actually fairly interesting because it even illustrates something that I also want to address because he also throws in some fossils here, and those fossils are actually the ones that are in the north. So it's actually really interesting to look at. So I'm gonna let it play a little bit. So and he just shows a little flash of people with E1B1B that a lot of them have light pigmentation. You wouldn't even think if you were to say what is E1B1B and what is this thing and what is that thing, right? E1B1B they'll say is normally African, but this was interesting when you start looking at roots of stuff. So I just want to review this little video and then talk about it. So flashes of different ones with different pigmentation. It's really interesting just to see that. Just take a note of that fact. Even different people you wouldn't even expect. Let me check the audio myself.
Some of the branches of E believed to have first formed in present-day Sudan or Ethiopia migrated west.
All right,
others
so
go south.
these are the things that's important. Right? This is that term, right, is important. Why? Because what was said right before it. Let me just put the text to speech on here so you can kind of see why that's important. All right, so it says right here, some of the branches of E believed, right? Now this is what's important. Are they found in the areas of Africa, Paleolithic or Mesolithic? That question. Do we have any fossils that would be before 20,000, said 20,000 on a time scale? Do we have any fossils? That's where things draw the line. If you got fossils to conclude that, I don't think so, because we actually only have rare finds of E1 lineages, and I think that is not displayed on this illustration. But I'm gonna let it play a
Some
little
of the
bit.
branches of E believed to have first formed in present-day Sudan or Ethiopia migrated west.
Now, I gotta address something real fast about E and D. I don't know how people even put D in Africa because there's no fossils of D in Africa. But let me just show something real fast. Because if you look at D, D is actually older than E. Why is that important that D is older than E? If D split from DE sooner and the fossils of D never show itself to be in Africa, and not just that, but there's an interesting mixture in D itself that has to be addressed and understood to understand the complexity of actually haplogroup D itself. I just want to point that out real fast on here of that. Let me just point to it. I want to go. It's an interesting mixture that I had talked about of certain people, and it will show that indeed D itself is going to be obviously out of Africa. So first, understanding that other geneticists would say this, right? 42,000 years ago, which even if you see on his little design, I'll go to his the earliest time, right? Because right here is not really a time there, just to kind of set that on to be understood. Because I still think this video after this point it gets interesting because he uses the fossils about over here, and once you understand how the fossils actually work, it's kind of interesting with that point. But let me just show what I mean. This time scale. I'll just zoom over here when he starts using it. Right here's where he's over here using it in this little part. Just gonna zoom up so you can see at the top up there.
EV68.
I'm just gonna point it out because it starts somewhere about here. Once he starts pulling out the E1B1B, okay, about here. So you see where he starts. You see that time frame right there. Now we already know that geneticists say themselves. They'll say themselves where they actually split and where certain groups is. Now they actually think the split might have been sooner because the information of D was actually inside D is actually important. Let me actually point that out real fast right here because I want to show you why D is older and why that matters, that D is older and what is in D. All right, so watch what it says right here. It's going to be from a paper. I'm just point out, right? If you know about, if anyone knows about Denisovans, you know that is an ancient Arctic people, right? It's an ancient Arctic people. Why is that important, right? Inferring human history in East Asia from Y chromosomes, right? So I was going to talk about some interesting things like the current Y chromosome evidence suggests multiple early migrations of modern humans, they say from Africa via Southeast Asia to East South Asia. So it's also important to understand that they'll throw in Africa because they already know they'll try to say, because they'll say humanoids, ancient humanoids, origin of people, monkeys and all that. They'll say they came out of Africa, even though we know monkeys millions of years old on their scales outside of Africa at the same time. But the fact is the movement of Southeast Asia to East Asia, because that's what it's really about. It's going to be really about movements from one part of Asia to another part of Asia, right? And the reason why is because it's and the northward migrations during the Paleolithic age shaped the genetic structure in East Asia. Paleolithic. That's this. We're talking the earliest possible time frame, right? Paleolithic, right? Okay, let's look into what it's saying concerning this Paleolithic information, because this is what's on right on this paper. I might as well go to it just to point it out because it's just talking about the age of these things. Let me just copy this and actually open a PDF of this. All right. Right. Let me actually put the little spot on this one. It's probably on not on the PDF, but the page here. Let's try it on the page. Otherwise, I'll just copy and paste it so I can just show it to you real fast. Right here. I'm just gonna copy it and kind of put it here. All right, so this is gonna be basically it. I don't know why it's not showing none of that thing, but I'll just open it up on a kind of a different path because there's a lot of places that's talking about it because when you got Paleolithic fossils, everyone can give their opinions all they want, but when they're looking at the actual stuff, it's different than just saying one thing. So this one, I'll just go to it right here because I could probably copy it from this, but I got something else from that I want to point out. Let me point out here. For this one, I have to actually get the PDF for it. But this is pretty much pretty much a highlight of what it's saying there, right? This is the highlight right from that little thing. This is what it's basically talking about. These DM174 populations, surprisingly, this is what's important. They surprisingly settled on the. I'm gonna copy this and kind of show where this is and talk about why this is important. The place where they settled and adapting to extreme environments, probably befitting from gene flow from Denisovans. Why is that important? Because they talk about this mystery population, and I wondered what it was, and it looked like it was a Homo assessor, but it's looking more like it might be more of the Denisovans. And that's important because that would basically mean all the DE groups are actually by fossils and actually by the autosomal mix of a wiped out species, right? In this area, that would mean that DE actually would be Eurasian by default because D is older than E. That would actually that's what that actually would mean. But a little more, right? They lived in Siberia. They lived at high altitude. They lived in tropical forests, right? It's pretty amazing, they say, right? This is actually talk about Denisovans, right? Get a little understanding of Denisovans, right? Because they found obviously evidence of Denisovans, and they make a big deal because they know they always been in South Asia and Asia, right? They'll talk about they just found just recently, actually, just what was it today? I think yesterday that they found a tooth of a Denisovan. It says this is unusual, right? Tooth is the first fossil evidence of Denisovans in Southeast Asia, right? New find supports a wide range for this ancient human ancestor. So that's this year, right? Talk about a tooth of a Denisovan and everything. Now, obviously, we get the understanding when they say that Denisovans died out, right? Now the research has identified the tooth as that of a Denisovan, mysterious cousins of Neanderthals and modern humans who likely died out, said 30,000 years ago. Now, hold on. If this species died out or was not here 30,000 years ago, and the D group has a mixture of Denisovans in them, that automatically makes the D group Eurasian. That actually puts the D group all the way in Asia. That's very important. That we're getting that expression that is actually a Eurasian group. And we know that because they have fossils, just like how we read from other places where they talk about genetic testing of the Ainu, and they know that the Ainu are an ancient Japanese group, right? And they know that they talk about basically recently it was confirmed, right? It was confirmed that the Japanese branch of DM55 is distant and isolated from other D branches for more than 53,000 years ago. So that's now when we're obviously we're taking what they're saying, that the outer African scale, the understanding of the meanings of these things, and kind of getting an understanding of what they're saying here. Let me just show you what paper that is right here. Let me make sure. I'm gonna just show you what this is, right? And you can find the information on the Anu. When they start looking into the Anu subgroups, their subgroups don't lead to Africa. Their subgroups lead somewhere else. Their subgroups basically come from far away, and that's who E is connected to, is to D, that breaks off earlier, which basically confirms that it had to be out of the areas of Africa, pretty much. Let me actually go to the paper on this, right? So that lets us know what's going on with these things. It lets us know, right? Let me just copy it and paste it here, right? But they'll break it down on the Anu, and you can go to the actual report and see, because if we're going to use these type of scales, right? If we're gonna, and what this is just using what Wikipedia says and not really looking at culture, because Wikipedia usually has pinpoints of a summary of a haplogroup, right? A summary, not the full picture of every single human being on Earth or every ancient paper that has ever been brought out, which a lot of them are recent. And a lot of them talk about autosomal, which just looking at Y chromosome is not going to even tell you 100% of who they were mixing with autosomally, or which female they were mixing with, because they could have picked up Neanderthal females. So that would probably push the chart back a little more on the out of Africa scale. I'm talking about the out of Africa scale, that the out of Africa scale makes no sense, right? This is obviously important to understand, right? It's very important to understand. But obviously, if you've seen the oldest M2 and things like that, it's over the number that he shows. Let me just go to a note here and kind of point something out real fast. And let me know, family, if the sounds weird now at this point. Let me make sure. All right, there we go. So let me go to a note here. And tell me if I'm not saying facts. Tell me if someone can put something other than what I'm putting here and say that this is what it is. Because remember, I showed it. There's papers that contest of an autosomal mix of haplogroup D with Denisovans, ancient Asian lineages that never went into Africa. So that autosomally makes them out of Africa. That means that's a Eurasian migration into Africa for that lineage, for that whole lineage, for the DE lineage. Because D itself, because just like if you've seen, remember, they was trying to use D0, which D0 was not DE. D0 was D2, which D2 was recently found just in the last years after they were trying to use those. There was only three modern Nigerians found in the areas of Africa. Only three modern Nigerians found in the areas of Africa. And they concluded that because it was a D0, which is confirmed D2, it must have always been in Africa. It must have always been in Africa. That's not true, right? That's obviously not true, because we know without a doubt that D2 was found in Syria. Not only that, but the D branch, the fossils of the D branch, and that's why we did that video. We talked about how he would say D must have started in Africa, but all the fossil is outside Africa. That's what I'm saying. We got to understand that D is older than E. D is actually older than E. It's a very old branch, but it's not as old as C. C is much older than D. That's another story to get into, because Japheth is older than Shem. That's another story, right? And then Helm is the A and B groups. This just something also to know. right? And that's what this is talking about when it's talking about this information, when it's going over who is what and what is what, right? Here it is. It's talking about the Jarwal. What group was that they were separated with? It's just going more deep into it, right? Before I point that out, I'm gonna show those years on that. But look again, what we're seeing here, where it's saying about these D groups, right? It says population surprisingly settled in basically the areas, obviously, of the north. That's where they settled. Talking Paleolithic time frames, right? Adapting extreme environments, possibly befitting from the gene flow from Denisovans, right? That's very deep to understand. But let's get to this other piece. Watch what it says here. Jarwal and Agi, I probably said that weird, shared haplogroup D lineages with each other within the last 7,000 years. Okay, so it's telling us that at least for 7,000 years, there was a D group over here. So I'm going to show you his video that proves something also I was talking about with these fossils and everything, that at least when the biblical narrative began, the E groups were over here. When the Acadian Empire started, which the Acadians actually started over here and began at Akkad and shot out, right? And I'm going to show you that this E group goes all the way over there to Turkestan and Elam and everything. I'm going to show you it because that's what we're going to do. We're going to break it down. Just look at the video a little bit. It's an interesting video too, just to see like the movements of E. But again, you can see these years. This is using the out of Africa scale, and if you use the out of Africa scale, I'm telling you, it does not point to a out of Africa origin. That's not what it points to. If you're going to use that path, if you're going to take that path and use the out of Africa scale, it's like choosing atheism and not actually knowing the history behind the book, right? You gotta know that it's what it said came to pass as it said. In fact, the book said of people before the whole world knew of people, like the Hittites. The book was speaking about Hittites before they came past, but that's another subject. Watch what it says here, right? Because we know that when we actually put this in monophylactic groups, CF is Japheth, right? DE is Shem, and A and B is Ham. We get a clear picture of the picture. But watch what it says. Jarwal. So these groups right here, at least 7,000 years, were up there in areas of the north. We'll show you this little paper, the Adamese, but had diverged from Japanese. Who they diverged from? These groups here. I'm gonna show this real fast. These people, right? A lot of people usually know about them and whatnot, but they're a group in between India and areas going to Japan. So these little areas like around here. So there will be some groups that settled over here, right? Because Japan, you'll have some other groups that will basically go over here and settle in these areas, right? So it's saying that these will be a split from those. And watch what they say here of the split. It's really interesting when we get the understanding of the scientific scale. If we're going to take the scientific scale, the geneticists, when they're looking at this, they're not going to lie. A lot of times, when they're all coming together and they're all looking at the same results because the life is in the blood. Who put the life in the blood? The Most High. And somehow, some way, those men up there mixed with some of the women that must have had ties to earlier lineages, like women who were with Japheth. Because remember, every woman today comes from Eve, right? Every woman today comes from Eve. And it is highly probable that some of those women could have got with the line of the women that we see today. It's possible. Not that they got with a woman, they got with a man, right? They would have probably got with one of the early sons of man before the time of the flood, right? Some other stuff I want to get into, some very deep things. But let's get back into this thing. So again, talking about the ones after the areas of India and everything, it says, but had obviously diverged from Japanese haplogroup D, Y chromosome, right? That's very important. 53,000 years ago, most likely by a split from a shared ancestral group. You see what it's saying there? That's a major number right there. You got to remember that haplogroup D, right? Especially D1, right? You could probably find something on D2 with it. But haplogroup D, they'll say it has something to do with about 50,000 years ago, for some of the evidence of it because of some of the locations that it's at. So just to show that, you can see right here, right there, when they're talking about it, talking about the jar wall, and they're saying 53,000 years ago, right? Now that is a major split, right? He's saying, and remember, all the Yap lineages, we know that the Yap lineages were together to get that Yap. I know that because for them all to be the same later with that Yap, at their root they mixed with something that made them who they are today, different than any other group. Those Yap lineages, DNA, right? And this D group that also has a Yap lineage, right? It lets us know that when it split from its neighboring D group, it was in Asia, right? It would be in the areas of Asia, with other groups, right? Other CF groups, right? O's and stuff like that. It was moving about. Because why wouldn't we expect that some sons of Shem, early sons of Shem, right, after Arphaxad, right, would have moved with some of the sons of Japheth? What would be so shocking to see that? Now, obviously not a large group, but maybe as you see with D group may have left over there and went that way. But the thing about Japheth, his whole branch is up there, right? And we talked about that by the time of Abraham's time, there's no J that goes down into the areas of Ethiopia and Abyssinia. That's actually important to know that someone's a Shemite, because we know Shemites go into that area. That's why this video we're going to look at is important, because he even shows how E1B1B, has ties to Abyssinia and still with the north, right? Early on, having ties to the areas of Abyssinia, right? Because we talked about that, go to the area of Yemen through Punt into Abyssinia. And we know that other Shemites will later get some ties into the areas of Africa because of that Bantu expansion that happens in the Iron Age, right? The takeover that happens. But it's made way by first the Chaldean movements of E1B1B into the areas of Africa. That's important. But they first settle only on the north up here, only on the north of here. That's important. So the Shemitic lineages that actually come from the Natufian and Gosulian places, which he doesn't really talk about, the Natufian and Gosulian, which some people would say, oh, well, the Natufian and Gosulians only like their fossils are about like 13,000, so it's not that old. But if you look at what actually is written about the Natufian and Gosulian papers, they actually tell you themselves some very important things when they're talking about what's going on in the reality of it all. Because we can see major understandings when we look at the picture of basically what's happening. Let me just open up a note and kind of show something. We know that the Natufian are Semitic. But if we use the quote unquote out of Africa scale and we actually push the Natufians' oldest finds, the oldest finds actually go up to to the area of Syria and Damascus, right? Crossing on the area of Mount Carmel, right? And Israel, like northern Israel, the upper area, right? That's important because we talked about how the Natufian, if you type down Natufian homeland, right? It's a later homeland from moving from Mesopotamia. That's important. So this little homeland right here, if we look on, let's get like a more detailed map they have. So right here, here's their genetic map. This actually would be the area of, you would have Damascus over here, right? But it bends around Seir. That's important. The reason why is because it's like a mirror before the people come. It's like a mirror right before the people come, right? They go in there and it's evidence. And let me show you how old the oldest ones is that actually come from the areas of Syria, because that's actually where the Israelites have connections to, right? Areas leaving from Mesopotamia, going down into obviously areas of Egypt, Africa, right? Because that's what they all did. They went down to the areas of Egypt, Africa, when we talk about the the historical writings of it. Let me actually grab something here and kind of show something on what I'm saying here about the E1B1 roots when we actually use the said out of Africa. I talked about this when I was talking about the Far Strait and a couple things with what was happening there, right? And if we remember too, nowhere does the scripture even conclude that this area, this territory, this lower area over here, nowhere does it ever conclude that this is not Semitic. If you look it up, the research of the Nubians and the Abyssinians, the Nubians and Abyssinians are Semitic. We know that because we got historical documents that tell us that they're Semitic, that they come from the Yemenites that moved downwards in the area, and the Nubians are Semitic, right? But look what it says right here on this paper. This is going to be from a paper from 2001. Right here, this is what I was talking about, some of the things of the Mota, things like that. This was brand new, right? September 2001, Genomic History of the Middle East. And this is what it was talking about. I'm just going to read what it says on the screenshot. It shows right here the haplogroup common in Natufian E1B1B, right? It lets you know right at the bottom right here, right? Though we also find a rare divergence, right? Y chromosome, which basically is 39,000 years ago. And then it'll tell you in the Central Semitic, right? Because what this study is talking about Semitic languages and how far back they go. Semitic, right? How far back it goes. And remember, we know that the J ends up later picking up Semitic, because if you know about the history of the Amarna letters, it talks about how the Mitanni and the Hittites, they picked up the language, and then they started to be in the lingua franca of Akkadian, and they started to talk that language. But they wasn't like the deep Afroasiatic language that was even used to decode Akkadian. I mean, and cuneiform, right? To understand the cuneiform text, they used a African language, a Saharian language, which was actually an Afroasiatic language, right? From the areas of Abyssinia to understand what actually was a Afroasiatic language. So again, you can see right here when it's talking about some of the understandings here, basically some of the things of Arabia and everything, when it's talking about these groups and whatnot, when the group that was common in Natufian and everything, that it gives us an understanding right here. These times overlap with the dates for Bronze Age origin and spread of Semitic languages in the Middle East and East Africa, because this area of Africa, this is where the E goes in. But you know what doesn't go in that area for a long time, but rules in the north with its monophylactic IJK family? If we look at the whole picture of what is an Afro-Asiatic group, right? Because we have to look at the roots. And just yesterday, I was pointing out how IJ, we have a 20,000 year old IJ that said was to begin at the beginning, Ice Age, right? That would be claimed after the flood type thing, right? If you want to use the biblical narrative to understand with the fossils of it, which that's what we do, right? We compare the fossil narrative, saying paint the picture of what's there, right? To the roots of J and get an understanding of it, because a whole bunch of documents that talked about how a lot of those Shemitic groups went down into areas of East, right? We're talking the areas where Ethiopia is, early on Africa, right? Very important. But look at J. J's group begins in an area of the Caucasus Mountains, right? And it does not go down, but goes upwards for all the Neolithic time frame. It's in the north for all the from the Paleolithic, the Mesolithic, and to the Neolithic transition, it comes downwards, and then it will not come into the areas of where Abyssinia is. But remember, we know without a doubt that documents tell you that many of the Jotunites went down into the areas of Ethiopia. These ones didn't go down into that area. They didn't go into East Africa. That's very important. But they ruled in the north since Mesolithic to Paleolithic. Because remember, we had pointed out also the oldest one, IJ, which was the root of the whole J branch. But even so, it goes into IJK, to HIJK, to GHIJK, to F-M89, to CF, which CF is the root of the whole Japhetic lineage. That's important. That's very important. So just understand the roots of things, to get a full understanding of things, so that you don't have to go back and forth and not understand the real picture here. So let's look again. Where does he start? Right? What year does he start? Does he start with the understanding about the Natufian? And remember, what is a Natufian? That's why I showed you the Natufian homeland right here. Where does the Natufian start? So we know that there's an old one. The reason why is because I already did a study on it. I'll put a video in the description. When we did a review on Bene Israel's DNA, we went all the way to root, like Paleolithic time frame. And I talked about how they shot out from the Natufian area. They shot out this way and they shot out this way. They spread out like that. Some shot down, some went up. That's what happened. And that's why you find some up here. Actually, you find some up there fairly early, and you find some down here. They didn't shoot out from here. They actually shot out from here and here. That's actually where they shot out at, and then they spread to all these different areas, because we can find the D and E groups in other places for a long time. But this group shot out from the top. It shot out from the top because that's what F did. F-M89 first it was here, and then it was all the way over here, because all these are related. Everything over here is related. F-M89 from his early branch, the earliest branch, went from here almost about like 50,000 years ago, went over here. And we're talking fossils. And then it went in multiple different ways. It even went overseas. It split, and obviously it became everything underneath it, right? IJK, all those became one, right? Very important. But that would be the Japhetic line, just to kind of get the understanding there. Now, the reason why that's important is because what I'm saying is, not only is it old, very, very old, but when put on a scale, it's also Semitic. It's also Semitic, and it's not just Semitic, it's Asiatic. It has to be Asiatic, because the D group is not in Africa. The D group is not in Africa, it's actually outside of Africa in Asia. That's very important, because it's gonna give us a more pinpoint picture of these things. I know, because when I studied some of the fossils that we have, right? We have a 24,000, right? Because remember, when he gets to about this time frame, look at they're still in Africa, right? They're still in Africa. But what he doesn't know is that at least early roots show in fossils, right? Early roots in fossils, it is written about that there's a 24 to 15,000 year old upper Paleolithic, right? I'm gonna show this little river, or basically where is that? Is right here in Siberia, right? It's gonna be in the areas of Siberia, which is basically in coast, or basically corner areas of Russia. So you can see, usually it goes to it again. All right. I don't know what happened, but it's basically in this area. That's where it's at. It's like basically in this area between Mongolia and Russia, pretty much. That's where it's pretty much at. Right there. There you go. So it's saying now, it's talking about a D group. Not over here. Not over here. But it's letting you know about a split, an early split. Let me just read what it's talking about here, right? This is basically what it talks about. And you got to get JPads if you want to get deep into the read of it, because it gets deep into the read what's basically there in this group thing, right? And basically, long story short, I'll just give the highlight, because to get all into it, I'm just gonna basically explain what it is right here. Let me just copy it, because you get other places that would tell you exactly what it is, and you can get it right off a wiki. It'll tell you right what it is. Right. This is it. This is the location, everything, and then it'll talk about what they found there, what exactly they found, and what group it is, and they'll tell you that it's a Yap lineage, the group that's there, and just for us to know that it will be a Yap lineage, tells us what's going on there, and you just gotta first understand how ancient they'll say that this culture is, right? Upper Paleolithic area. You can see there got drawings of mammoths, so at least the mammoth exists in that time frame. So they're saying that, it's right after the ice age, right? The ice is melting, because remember, ice age is just the age of the ice melting. So remember, all that flood water, it's easy for it to freeze over in certain areas, right? Exactly. If you look at Antarctica, the water in Antarctica, the thick layers of water underneath that is a forest. Underneath Antarctica is a forest. So there was a forest there before there was a giant chunk of water over it. So that's just important to understand. But it talks about how long ago it was and everything. So obviously, having writings of mammoths and everything gives us a little understanding of what's going on. And they got obviously some interesting groups right here. It'll tell you straight for some of them, but there's more. There's D groups in it. But obviously, you can see where it talks about the mtDNA. What is there? I talked about it before. This is a bunch of DE groups, A groups, A0 groups, and Isham. Isham's over there because Isham is over there mixing, because it even has Isham's mtDNA right here, where it says it may only known example of basal Y DNA. So the early R lineage, you can see the early R lineage, which Isham makes a R because it's a K group. Isham's a K group, K dash, or was it 5 something like that. That is the only member of haplogroup R star that did not belong to R1A and R2, because they got a wiped out R group. They got an R group that never became any other R group today. It's wiped out. Remember I was talking about that if Cain and Abel were brothers, Cain should have made a family line that would be identical to humans today, right? They would be identical to someone today, right? Especially with all the mutations, because apparently they were mixing with angels, right? Or different things like that, right? They were early lines, and the world was different than it was today. So they could have got, and remember, not all of them was righteous. A lot of them could have had babies really fast, especially at those ages they were. So that's obviously going to cause high mutations as well, right? And it said the whole world was wicked, so who knows exactly what was going on. But it's letting us know that this is the transition of the Paleolithic and Mesolithic. I want someone to show me an E group at this time frame in Africa, right? And confirm it as a African lineage to its completion, right? With the said so-called African mtDNA and the said African Y-DNA. That's what I want to see. Both of those things together in this time frame, Paleolithic, Mesolithic. That's my challenge. That's the same challenge that I still had, that there is no Mesolithic or Paleolithic actual fossils of E and D in Africa, because I know without a doubt that D is mixed with the Denisovans, and the evidence of D splitting outside Africa for a long time, and the mixing of this R group, of these groups. That's why I was talking about this early R. You can also see that it will also have right here the obviously mitochondria mtDNA, pretty much belonging to pretty much haplogroup U. And this long time ago, and this area is a long time ago, right? It's a long time ago, and we can actually see that there will be a spread of multiple groups amongst them, right? A spread of multiple groups amongst them, and that's just important to understand in itself. to understand that is a spread of it. And it'll talk about different groups that would basically get wiped out and whatnot, like that. That R that was there, that's a R that we don't see. We just don't see. But these write about that event. I had talked about it before. That event was pretty much at the end of it, they fought, right. It's almost like it's a Mesolithic Paleolithic battle that happens up there, and that's why the DNE and the R groups and all those groups separate like crazy, right. They go to the corded ware and the bell beakers, because if you note in the bell beakers, and that's what we're gonna look at, the bell beakers have E1B1B too. They have E1B1B and they have other groups in there because they go pretty far, and there's some groups that dominate in the battles and whatnot. But this is where it starts. This is where it all starts. They all start with this this culture here. We know because we had a lot of different places that was talking about it. A lot of different places that was talking about these groups that was in these little areas, and they talk about so that they became the Mongols, right? They'll talk about the Mongol groups, and then they'll talk about what they had in them, in their genetics in them, right? And they'll tell you we also observed DEM145 and D1. So they actually got DE, the original subgroup of DE. That means this that's using guesswork, that's guessing DE's origin. He never actually looked into DE's origin. He never looked into D's origin, to the actual origin of D. And that, because that would change everything when you start looking into D's origin, right? Because everyone, a lot of times they know it went into Africa. It went into Africa, yes, because that's what it makes sense as a Shemite. It had to go into Africa. It had to go to Abyssinia. Even writings of Semitic language, that the Semitic language went into the areas of Africa. There's no doubt about that. So that's no problem that group went into Africa. But you also got to know about the E1B1A groups. When did they go into Africa? They're younger, way younger than D groups. E1B1A goes into Africa about the transition of the Bronze Age and Iron Age, even especially in the Iron Age, because they have iron weapons, iron tools, right? Not to get confused with the Bronze Age Mota, right? That's a Bronze Age Mota, right? Not Paleolithic, not Mesolithic, not Neolithic, right? That's a Bronze Age Mota. That's the oldest, and that's Bronze Age. That's the oldest E1B1A in the Bronze Age. That's the oldest E1B1A fossil in Africa, the oldest one. And remember, we're talking the scale of Neolithic, Mesolithic, Paleolithic time frames. So in Africa's time frame, we know that the Mota is the oldest E1B1, and that's E1B1A2, which is E1B1AC. See what I'm saying? It's really deep to understand that, right? That's a fact. I want to see someone show me an older E1B1A than that. An older confirmed E1B1A in the areas of Africa. This proves that it has a back migration, because there's older E1B1As outside of Africa, let alone that E1B1A E groups automatically are connected to D groups, which are automatically outside of Africa by its autosomal mix and the fact of it splitting and what it links with. That's what makes it important. So you can see the papers when I talk about 39,000 years ago. The reason why, again, like you can see on the start of his time frame,
B1B, also known as E.
right there. So do we have any fossils higher? Do we have any papers? Right? Do we have any papers at all? Can I even find such a thing? Because him putting it at that start like that just shows that he's most likely to throw in extra stuff. Let's just put, because remember, what group is he talking about? At this point,
Nile River. E1B1B, also known as EM250.
So right there, so you see how he's talking about from E1B1, which E1B1 makes E1B1B before it makes E1B1A, because P2, right? What is P2? What is P2? Right? We have a fossil of P2. We have an exact fossil of it in the Natufian time frame. Here's P2. P2 is in the Natufian time frame. You can find it just by typing Natufian, right? You know, have to type all that. Just Natufian. And if you go to the papers, right, it'll show you even Natufians have very un-African, or they're called African mtDNA. They have a different type of mtDNA, which are these. This is literally their mtDNA with those E groups, E1B1, right? They actually have a actual E1B1 in this group, and this will be an actual fossil. If someone have another paper with this exact E1B1, which is P2, which makes E1B1A and V38. If someone has that actual paper, that would be one thing, but the understanding of it changes things. And this is what's important to understand about P2, right? When P2, E1B1, P2 was found, it obviously changed the game. It lets us know how it's going to be linked, right? It tells us right here, right? Firstly, haplogroup E-M2, formerly E1B1A, which is now E1B1A1. That's important, E1B1A1. And haplogroup E-M329, which is E1B1AC or E1B1A2. That's going to be different, E1B1A2, are now united by a mutation of V38 and V10. So this is very important. Just those little snips kind of make a difference, right? They're brother lineage, but they separate. So E1B1A, E1B1C are more closer than E1B1B and E1B1A, but they both come from the same father lineage, which is E1B1, P2. That's very important. As it says, obviously, secondly, within E1B1, right? Just talk about some other branches where it talk about obviously these E1B1s are going to make those other mutations and everything. So it just talks about the three lineages. E1B1A, E-M2, E1B1B, E-M215, and E1B1C, E-M2, E-M329, right? Just talk about they were all included in that genealogy, pretty much. That's one family is what it's saying. They're all related, right? So if we're using one family, we can find the whole family by looking for the family, right? It wouldn't make if you're looking for your brother, right? You're gonna look for the other brother. If you're gonna look for one brother, you're gonna look for one brother to see what they're connected with, what's their ties and whatnot, how they're connected and everything. That's gonna give us a good picture of what's really going on instead of kind of guessing at the thing, right? Because this is the real, when we're talking about roots, origins, places where they actually came from. We gotta look at the papers and go over those things, right? Like I said, I can easily just did animations and brought these things out, but I rather show the actual physical papers on what some things are saying, right? On what things are saying, and it kind of paints a picture that may at first may not be understood, but is able to be understood, and that's Israel. That's in the land of the Levant, right? That's a long time ago, right? That's about almost 13, 15,000 years ago. But remember, there's older ones than that, right? And we had talked about that on another paper with some of these things. I was going to scroll down real fast, and obviously we know that in the Mesolithic, at least, E1B1B is in the Levant, right? We got different subgroups of it because we know in the Gosulian culture, which the H2 comes in that culture, H2 and T comes into the Neolithic time frame after the E1B1B are dominant in the Levant and all in the Mesolithic time frame, right? We're talking all Arabia, right? They obviously pushed other groups out that was there previously because they're there during the Mesolithic and everything. And they're there very early because we know that as books say, it will tell you that the Damascus in the area of the Levant in Syria was owned by the Shemites. So we know that without a doubt that the Shemites should be in the area of Israel, and they should move in certain coast areas like the far east area of Africa, right? Abyssinia, and we talked about that with historical documents when we talked about that before. We can show that again, right? We already shown that Abyssinia, which is in Africa, right, cornering of area of Ethiopia, that area was Semites, right? even the Nubians were Semites. They were the Jotanites that early before Abraham's time moved down to that area, because we know that as soon as the Arabians started recording in 1800 BC, right? That's 1800 BC. They recorded that the Arabians moved into the areas of Africa. So that's very important. So it's going to let us know that early on, even before Abraham, that was people settled in the areas of Africa, which Jay doesn't go into that east area of Africa. No time when the Jotanites go down there. So that's very important. So E1B1B, you can see right here, obviously would be in the areas of Levant. Now, the movements of it is very, very important. So I like this video because he only shows one side, right? He only shows this area, and that's all those papers that he's using all the fossils from basically this little paper here. So I'm gonna show I'll show the whole thing of the movements of E before even it becomes the Akkadians, before it becomes the Akkadians, because it's kind of interesting to see. Let me actually go back here. All right. So we click this, or rather this. So he obviously has a lot of studies from the Paleolithic to the Mesolithic and everything, putting down what's there and everything that pops up. And it's kind of interesting to see it all laid out right before you. So he has a list of time frames, so he just puts it all there. I like this one because he got a picture of all these, like you can click it and got a little history behind the cultures and everything, and he got pictures of the culture and the movements and everything. And all of them were idol worshippers, right? All of them were idol worshippers. So even just study them, you want to study them on your own time. But we do find certain groups like IJK, like we talked about, early Mesolithic. That means all IJ groups come from one family, from one node. But the reason why that's important because we can get some of the major pictures of certain groups. I'm gonna actually pull one from here because I have a little thing that I'll just do like a slide through of it, of the time zones and everything. Because that one's nice too. It just talks about E1B1Bs and areas, which we know E1B1B, at least in the Mesolithic time frame, is up here. At least in the Mesolithic time frame. And that's what he's illustrating on this thing. At early times, he records that at least they're here, early times. And then obviously having also connections to here, like how Shemites should have connections to the Abyssinian areas and connection to these areas. That's very important. And also they're the Chaldeans, because the Chaldeans, if you know early on, the Chaldeans have ties to these areas, to Spain. You can look at the history of the Chaldeans, right? Early Akkadians and everything, information, right? Their roots, where they come from. Chaldean, Akkadian, if you put all the history together, it shows that they had ties to Spain early on. And then they obviously moved to the areas of the Levant. That's very important. And that's what we were talking about with some things, with some of the movements of these things. When we talk about leaving from the Afar in that area. And then remember, it talks about from the split of Eber's children, the world was divided, because we talked about what happened at the Afar Strait, right? If these were said 30,000 years ago, then the Afar Strait event happened, where this actually used to didn't have water in it, and this didn't have water in it, and it cracked. These two pieces of land used to be one. Not a lot of people know that, but these two pieces of land used to be one piece of land. And then the Afar Strait broke, right? If you've seen it, I'll put the video in the description where we talk about it. That this broke, water came in here and separated these two continents. That's what it talks about with the time of Eber, is that the people were separated, right? It was divided, not like a divide like the flood, but a separation that happened. So that's early Eber, right? So some of the Jotanites go down here, and that's how we know that some of the Jotanites are down there. Some of the Eberites obviously over here in this area. So Jotan, Eber, in these different areas, and obviously they're related. They're gonna have the same groups, right? They're gonna have related groups and everything. So it's very important. But you can see up in these areas, at least in this time frame, you can see he's having them go up in this area. So that's very important. And then they develop up there in these areas right here. And the hot spot there. So it's a large group there. And they develop in these areas here. You can see they're just and Spain, right? Obviously areas of France. That's what we talked about with that E1B1A that was over here, right? And that E1B1A that was over here was between 5,000 and obviously this time frame, right? And it was in this area, that E1B1A. But it's gonna these groups are gonna make a movement over this way. That's what's gonna happen. They're being all over here because they had connections with Lydia, and that's what I was talking about. That they came from Atlantis and whatnot. You can see where they're reaching and going far. This is still E1B1B. Look at that. And he's using what he's using now because he tried to. I don't know why he did this. He tried to confuse people and make it look like at first he was using fossils and now he starts to use fossils. And he's like, oh, the whole time I was using fossils. But the whole one part was estimates with modern people, and now he's using fossils. I'm going to show the fossils of the movement of it because the fossils are kind of interesting, I think. I think the fossil movement is kind of, and grab that from this thing here. So I do think it's interesting, the movement of the fossils. So it is kind of interesting. So obviously it starts at the Mesolithic. That's what you're seeing, right? Let me just click it. There's obviously a E group right there. But before that, let me make sure I touch on some of the questions because now we're going to dive into E1B1B, into the movements of it. Let's see how everything's going. So, amen. Audio's, see, Hebrew, like I said, this is no pretty surprise. Amen. Can I help get out to the masses? Amen, family. Whatever you can do, if we can get this, let me tell you something. Let me tell you guys something. One of the most solid things of our generation right now to prove who is genetics right now. And I'm talking concerning bloodline, like who is the ancient pinpoint bloodline of Israel. By monophylactic groups, we can find out who's Shem. That will allow us to find out who is Israel. But we got to get deep into the book too to understand that when they left out of Egypt, obviously they came out of mixed multitude, but we need to first find Israel before we even claim what is that mixed multitude, because we're not going to just say any group is the mixed multitude. They need to be around Israel to be claimed that they are supporters of the real Israel. So bloodline Israel, if we're claiming bloodline Israel, this is the way to find them. But if we want to get into the spirit, amen, we can get into the deep things of the spirit and everything. But if you want to help, what you want to do is whatever you know, just throw it away. Throw it away. And I'll show you some brothers that do some great work, right? Hebrew of Israel, William, son of Yah, even Genesis 49ers. I think that the more I see him work, the more I see him like at least try to curse less and stuff. I think he's one of the wisest that's messing with this stuff. But I think, when it comes to language, we got to be careful on how we speak with things. That's just one thing with that. But I think he's very wise. I think there's certain individuals that's very wise. Benaiah, Israel, there's so many, Dante Force, there's so many different individuals that not just look into genetics, but the whole picture, right? The literature that actually supports it, the history. But the genetics is so important because the cranial studies of the skulls, the Doe-cultiphatic skulls, and knowing that most of the Negroid peoples now have that Doe-cultiphatic skulls, it's just a fact of things. Remember, we looked at also the Yemenites that still had a Negroid-ish feature, right? They had dark skin, but they had this like Arabian look to them. But they had Doe-cultiphatic skulls. And we talked about that. A lot of those are those E1B1B groups that can have light or dark skin. But that's what we need to get the word out about this monophylactic family of A and B being Hem, and D and E being Shem, and CF being Japheth, and understanding the separation of those groups. If we can bring that out to people, then we can really allow how the biblical narrative was so advanced to really paint these things before we even seen it. Right? It's wild spirit upon you. Amen. Amen, family. Amen. All these things for free as we eat. This is brother Hebrew is doing great work on this topic. That's amen, family. Amen. 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 That's right. That's right. Amen. Amen. That's right. Just wanted to show that real fast. All right, now let's get in. Let's get deep into this. So first, let's start. Let's start pretty early. So just exclude the fact that he just tried to throw an E1B1A on there, and in all this, right? Because we know where they come from, where they go. Now that we know that actually they root from here and they do go into here and they do go over here and they come out over here and they settle over here from going over here. And then some of them actually have ties to groups that originated over here. That's where they were. Isham, you can look it up. Isham, right? If you know about Isham, right? ISM, you can just put DNA and then you'll find them, right? He was originally a K2. That K2 becomes a pretty much your this how you say it, KMNOPQR. Isham is literally all those. That's what makes it really interesting. Isham, the finding of Isham is literally, because when you hear people say Q is Indian and stuff, well, Q used to be one with R, and R used to be one with N, and N used to be one with O, and they was all in a fossil that was found called the name Isham that was found in Siberia. That's the one I was talking about when we talk about. Also, D was up there, right? We did a video. I put the video in the description. We did a video on them fighting and up there, and that's probably why you get certain mutations really fast, because they was mixing with these ancient said people lines, and the reason why is just is on another level, because a lot of these are actually wiped out lines. A lot of them are wiped out lines that aren't here today, that are just different lines that have diverged from this group that began up there, right? And that's why the autosomal is going to paint the picture of it. The autosomal is going to tell you who was linking with who early on, and that's why looking at the Iberasians, their mtDNA tells that story too. That they came from a group from the north, right? But again, that's that Isham. That's why Isham is so interesting to know about, important to know about. And I never seen him talk about Isham, but he should talk about Isham. Maybe get a little explanation why that whole group is one family like that. But let's look at this, because this is where we're gonna get a little dive in on the history here. So already know that his illustration here, just to kind of move on. So obviously the history was over there in the north, and that's why even just to consciously, for anyone that's coming in, right, we already know that we have finds of old Natufian. That means because remember the word, what does Natufian mean, right, is named off of the Judean mountains. So old Natufian, but that's obviously not only where we find Natufian, we find them in all of Syria, Mesopotamia, all throughout that area. But the oldest one we found was 39 years ago. And remember, that's not that far from the split, right? Which even pushing the split back to the mutation of D was up in the north about 53,000 years ago, getting major mutations and everything. So even right here, you can see this one talking about, right, on genetic study in 2020, they talk about when they was arguing about D0, because the D0 was a modern D, but when they found a fossil right here, they also argued that about the polygeny, right? Talking about when they analyzed the ancient and present day non-African Y chromosomes, all point to Southeast Asia as the origin 55 to 50,000 years ago of all known surviving non-African male lineages. When they talk about which ones, they talk about haplogroup D, right? And then that's why they talk about 70 to 55,000 years ago migration. They'll say migration from Africa of basal D and whatnot. But if you look at the paper, they don't have DE to claim that D came from Africa and to claim that DE was in Africa, because remember, D comes from DE. So you can't just say that E is found in Africa, so D must be African, because this D surpasses the years of E. This D is older than E. So that's important. So the D haplogroup, D1 and D2, is much older than those groups. And remember how I talked about how we broke it down, how D0 was actually D2, and that actually D2 was actually in Syrians, right? They actually found out that it was in Syrians and everything. That's very important. And it also would tell us where it actually went, right? It'll even tell you right here, right? Divided around 26,000 years ago. One is found in Russia, right? A Russian Syrian descent, and an African American, right? And one found in Nigeria and Saudi Arabia, right? And it just talks about obviously the ones that they found are the ones of D2, the ones of the Syrian and the African American, right? One in America, that's America. It don't matter if they call him African. It's found in America, right? But it's traced to Syria. So just because someone's dark in the lands of America doesn't make them African. So that's important. That's just important to understand. Not everyone who's dark in America is African. So just remember that. So, but this is what some of the papers are saying, and they go over it quite intensively when they're breaking down some of these things of those Ds that they find there, and some of the places where they're found at, some of the fossils that they're found at very early on, just to get a little understanding of D. D is a very early lineage. Remember how I was talking about it was connected with the Isham, right? We're going to get into the E1B1B, but I just want you to understand without a doubt that the studies on D and E, the D group, one is older, right? Remember I was talking about that upper Paleolithic humans in Europe had recent Neanderthal ancestry. You see what it's talking about there? Talk about groups up in the area. They will be in areas with not just Neanderthals, but Denisovans. This is what makes it really important to understand that there will be humans outside of Africa and everything. But this is what they talk about when they talk about, obviously, talk about Isham and other groups and everything. When they talk about the connection of all these groups and everything. When they talk about the alleles that's in these populations and what they suggest that they find in them, right? Because they're basically talking about certain ones in certain caves, like this one. This is the one we want to take a look at, and some of the other ones. They get really deep into these upper Paleolithic lines. But this is what they find out about this one in a certain cave, and this one in another cave. They say they calculate it as D. They calculate them as haplogroup D. That's important. They're calculated as haplogroup D. Just to understand, just a quick summary for these things. So I don't want to take too long in it. But there's more. There's much more. There's much more to go into when going to haplogroup D. As you can see, if we get into the levels of it, it gets pretty deep when we get deeper into the origins of it. But that's what D itself. Again, D itself, right? This is another one that talks about it and everything. That talks about D and its connection, even with E groups and R groups as well, because that's what Isham was. R, Isham was an R over there. But just to summarize it, the Middle Eastern haplogroups D and E split, and they say about 42,000 years ago. So he's starting about 42,000 years ago. Yeah. So remember, D and E split in the Middle East about 42,000 years ago, but you don't put up there. So skipping a little ahead, he puts them where they pop out, obviously out of here, right here. So remember, they split from here. They fill this area, and they fill this area, and they're also over here. We're gonna point it out, and they're gonna develop in this area, and that's what the fossils are gonna say. Now remember, a lot of these dates, a lot of these years, were modern dates, but he transitions when he gets to just about at this point here. He's going to get to the fossils. He's going to start pulling out some fossils. So about here.
Now, let's take a look at the path and timing of the spread of the E13 major branch.
So you hear what he's saying? So now he's going to look at the branch of the spread of the branches. So why? Because it's one of the most dominant ones in the north. So these ones go over here, and everything. So now let's talk about it. So remember, E was up there in the north, right? E right here, EM78 was up there in the north, and that's a Shemitic lineage. So always remember that. As we point out E, we don't need to explain anymore. We know it's a Shemitic lineage. Here's one that's over here in this northern area, in the areas of Africa, right? And then here's another one in this northern area in the areas of Africa, all right? Now let's go to what happened. So obviously, we can see where agriculture is, where most of the agriculture is, obviously in the Levant, right? Where is this? This is the African plate, right? If you want to know, yes, the Israelites dwell in Africa for a long time because they literally are dwelling on the African plate, right? You can see, right? African plate, right? All that area of Africa is basically the African plate. You can see right here. So right here, that would be the African plate. All this would be the African plate right here. It includes Nubia and splitting that areas of Abyssinia, right? Is that a mistake? I don't think so. I think the Most High is working right with what he's doing there, kind of set the understanding for these things. But you can see here, get a pinpoint understanding. This is the African plate. So that's where the Israelites go. They dwell in the African plate for a while. Right? They go down, dwell in the African plate, and then they come up. And then, they cross over and everything. They go into the wilderness. We don't know where they go in the wilderness. No one can say that they know exactly where they go when they go in the wilderness. Yes, we know they dwell in the wilderness. We don't know exactly where the wilderness is, right? We know that the wilderness could have been anywhere because if they crossed over, they would have been already over here. And if they wanted to walk for a while, they can walk for a while. And that wouldn't even be a long walk. It wouldn't be a long walk. It wouldn't even take them years to walk this. But they can walk this not that long. Because remember, how long did it take them to leave Egypt and get over here? Did it take them that long to leave Egypt and walk over here and cross over to have a crossover? If I remember, that only took them a week. Right, it only took them about a week because if we look at some of the things that said, right, they do a celebration, they had the feast, right, and everything, and what goes on, right. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was about a week. That might be exaggerative, but understand what I'm saying here. It was not that long. So the wilderness could have easily been this area, and some who went into exile could have easily went through these areas or through the areas of Libya, like other Midianites or areas of Punt. Through areas of Abyssinia where we have other Shemites. So that's important. So we have to also know that there's possibilities of spread in these areas, but they're going to be obviously in this lower area because after Abraham leaves this area, he comes down, right, and he rests here. That's why that P2 is interesting because we do find him in the area of the Judean mountain. So, and that tomb might not even be the right area. Edom what's his name? Herod might have put the tomb in the wrong spot. He might have, because he built a giant tomb over the grave. Might been in the wrong spot, and we might have actually found Abraham. Might have actually found him. So it's very important because that P2 makes all the Abrahamic lineages, and that's that P2, right? They can say whatever age they want to say it is because we know that other groups are astronomical ages as well. So that's important to know. So just to kind of point that out, that they dwell in the African plate for a while. So, but the agriculture is going to be in this area, right? In these areas, right? We can find this movements with the pre-pottery Neolithic B. Now, if we go down a little bit, the first things we're going to see is an interesting movement of R, right? So R actually leaves this area and it actually comes from, remember, R was that Isham K2 group that came from far away. So always consider that R began over here with O, N, P, all those things because they came from F-M89. So F-M89 was born, went all the way over here, and in the midst of F crossing here, a mutation happened with the IJK that was over here already. So F-M89 was over here, made IJK, and then we get a migration of one of the K groups, K2, going over here. And then apparently K1 made a massive migration after a mutation from F-M89 and settled over here. So that was F-M89 over here, and the mutation ended up dwelling over here. That's why you see a lot of K, certain Andaman Islanders and whatnot. You can see it if you type down Pacific Island haplogroups and everything. They got these very interesting haplogroups, but they look dark skinned. These groups look very dark skinned, but they have what one would say would be Indo-European lines. But they have very dark skin because also this is going to be a tropical zone. It's also important to know about tropical zones, right? Or rainforest zones, right? Rainforest zone, tropical zone. They're about the area of the equator. So you can see right here. So these ones are going to have a darker skin pigmentation. These ones as well who start to come around these areas, and these ones as well. And that's because of the equator, right? Don't let that pigmentation allow you to forget that where they come from before their color comes in a certain tone, right? So it's very important to understand with those things. So remember, D is over here, so obviously it's getting a darker pigmentation, still staying around these areas, and E ends up going into these areas, and obviously these are lush areas, right? They're not going to go down there like, well, people in the year 2000 are going to judge us if we go into Africa. They're going to say we're African. Well, you're right. They're going to say we're African, so we probably shouldn't go down there. But they're going to say, you know what, this looks great, and a place that we can rule over and take our bronze weapons and dominate this area. And that's what happens. They dominate this area, and some of them that was over here went overseas over here, and they still stayed dark skinned. So it's like, it's kind of like a conundrum. They mostly, some of them go up here and turn light skinned, but most of them go over here and here and here, and they are still darker skinned. And they're going to be over there, and some of them have those E groups that still settle in these tropical areas. But over here is not many of the E, but the D group that goes over here that settles in these areas. E group is over here mostly, and there was a long time ago some E groups over here that went into this area from over here, that went down over here. As you see, they're developing in the north over here in the areas of the Balkans before the year 3000. Let's go over here. Let's go a little sooner than that time frame. So notice E1B1B is in the Levant. And what time frame is this? This is going to be about 6000 BC to 5000 BC. So about, on his time scale, it would be about here. So about this transition. So at this transition here, we know that E1B1B was already over here. So you can see what's going on with these years. So we already see E1B1B was already over here. Let's see where else E1B1B is. You can see right here, obviously, remember we was talking about the Iberasians that were going up here. E1B1B over here. Now they also are in another place, right? Obviously over here, right? You can see that culture in the Neolithic, E1B1B, right? So E1B1B here, here, and here, right? And we pointed that out, what culture that exactly is. Just by that placement, we know exactly what culture that is, because we have talked about it before, which is a culture important to know, which is this one, right? It goes from the Levant, goes out as it spreads from the farming and everything. Let's talk about the spreading of farming. And we know that they were farmers because that's the group that was in the farming area that transitioned from the Natufian, right? That would be the group that we want to keep an eye on. But let me point out this interesting paper. So you can see right here, here's a quick understanding of the movements of Afroasiatic or Semitic. So remember, the Acadians are going to come out and they're going to take this area over here. But remember, there's also some Semitic. See, ancestral Semitic, lower Levant is the first dispersals of Semitic, because remember, these two continents were one at first, and this became water over here. This broke and this spilled over. Probably some group must have got super strong early on and must have dwelled in the valley and probably was wiped out early on. I'm just letting you know that how sometimes these things work. They probably got really strong, but it do have ties to early Arabic in the areas of obviously Abyssinia, and you can see the movements where it's coming from, Afroasiatic, going down into these areas. 6,000 years before present, right? 6,000 years before present, going from this area origin, right, going down. And we talked about that 3,000-year-old said Natufian, that's that E group, right, moving in this area. So in this transition, they are Afroasiatic group that moves through this area, right? Origin of Afroasiatic, right? On this boundary line, because what is Afroasiatic? Even Hebrew. Remember, Abraham is not your oldest Shemite, right? We're not going to just get one branch of E1B1A and say we only need to find an E1B1A. E1B1A is not Mesolithic, nor is it Paleolithic. So we need to find a P2. That's what we need to find, a P2. And even his root branch, E-M69, which also we find that in the Levant. So that's important. But let me point out that culture right here. So you see this culture that's moving about, right? Early, this is the later 10,000 BC, the over here, right? Stretching them over time, 3,000 BC on these little areas over here. So that's very important. And let me just point out this culture here, right here. All right. This is what it's called, cauldron pottery culture. Cauldron pottery culture. Very important. It links multiple pieces of culture together. So back over here. So you see this one was E1B1B, this one was E1B1B, and this one was E1B1B. So do you see that? Blows E1B1B. So 1, 2, 3 of the Shemitic lineages locations. So very important. Obviously, they're going to also have connections to Africa, right? Because that's where Shemites go. We should expect that they should have connections to Africa. At least it even tells us, at least all the way back to the Natufian branches, right? But understand this is using the out of Africa scale, but we can understand it that at least we know that these fossils exist. And if we squish it down and understand it, then we understand that the biblical narrative is true, make it monophylactic, and we can understand who is it. Forget about the numbers. Just know that the larger numbers mean it's closer to Adam. That's how I put it. Larger numbers means it's closer to Adam. So before we dive in, let me see. I see a bunch of come in a little bit here. See how you doing. Yes. Yep, that's right. Mount Sinai, that's right. It is right there in the midst of the areas of between Yemen. Yep, you're right. And that's why it's important, because the Midianites is what got with the Israelites. That's right. That's right. So you can see right here. So we know that they're here in this time frame. We know that E1B1B is here, E1B1B is here, and E1B1B is here, and obviously have areas and ties to these areas, right? But also remember noting the fossils there. All right, so now let's go to another time frame and see what happens after this. So then we get an expansion of what is called the Copper Age, right? Copper is starting to be used. And the copper is so important because the copper is going to really tell us which societies are starting to do a lot of work, who's getting more advanced, right? And we know that already the people are already fighting with different weapons, but then copper comes in. So it's going to kind of change things a little bit. So obviously this tells us where the most copper was. So obviously the Levant had a lot of copper, and also the Scythian area. And this group over here had a lot of copper. So we have a lot of people in use of copper, right? Some areas more hostile than others. Remember I was talking about that early R lineage? This is why I talked about that R lineage, that left here. So our early R lineage, when we follow the whole movements of R, as we see is in a lot of different places, it actually makes some major movements over here and starts to dominate certain areas. So they start to really dominate certain cultures, right? This is South Yemna, South Yemna culture, right? And you can see South Yemna obviously has a lot of R's and I and J in the European culture that settles in this area and is going to become very important. Also, the core Araxis culture. That's going to be your high J groups, right? They're going to be pushed, obviously, because R is dominating this area. J is also a little bit in this area, but this one is going to start dividing from it. So core Araxis, you can see right here, it's going to have a J2, J1, G. There's some R's entering into it, right? And then some I's, right? But you can see a lot of those J's, J1 and J2. So that's very important. But now where is E1B1B? In the Levant. So E1B1B, Levant, Mesopotamia. So what time frame is this? At least 3000 BC, we have to admit that E1B1B is in the Levant and Mesopotamia in at least 3000 BC, the transition 3000 BC through the Chalcolithic time frame. Mesolithic, E1B1B, or Mesolithic, Neolithic, right? Copper Age, E1B1B, Mesopotamia, Levant. Here's another E1B1B. And this culture will be right here. So we expect them to be right there. Now the R group is going into that group. So that's probably going to be interesting to keep an eye on, because at first it doesn't have an R group besides R1A, but R1B is the one we want to look at, because that's the one I was saying was Magog. And Magog ends up merging with a lot of different groups. What's important too, before R even gets over here, R is actually gonna be coming from somewhere. We're gonna talk about it, but notice it's not in this culture yet, right? If you look at the culture over here in this area, the reason why is because the way they come out is kind of crucial, noting it in their movement. So this is where they come out. So this is gonna be fairly after the event, even this one. So right here, notice in this area right here, we're going to have an R right there, right? But notice where we don't have an R. See that cauldron pottery? That cauldron pottery we don't have an R. So where did R come from, right? Where if there's no R in this linear pottery and this cauldron pottery, see this linear pottery where it's G, C, I, and T. So in this space, there's no R in this space here at this time frame. There's some that swept through and then they're going about at the Neolithic time frame, but there's some that's here in this time frame. It's because the R group, what the R group is actually doing is that it's bending down, is bending into the areas of Africa. Because if you know, one of the major kings that rise in the 18th dynasty, right before the 19th dynasty with the Israelites, 19th dynasty with the J and the G groups that take over, that would be in the 19th dynasty. But in the 18th dynasty, right, early on, about the time where we get Joseph and everything, we'll have our lineages that are going to be down there. So early our lineages that are going to be down there in that area. Because how do we know? Because King's Tut's line is that line, right? Akhenaten and Amenhotep, all those are going to be our lines of those kings that come down there, right? But we also got to know something kind of interesting. Let me point this out. Watch what first we got to understand this to understand where E goes, because R kind of does the same thing. Remember, I was talking about how D and E was over here, then that R, that Isham divided, and also those E's have the same empty DNAs. A lot of those empty DNAs from them. Also, R has L3. You'll later see that in the Corded Ware culture, R gets an L3. But notice about 20,000 BC, R comes from over here this way. It goes into the Umayyad culture, becomes a dominant feature over here, tries his luck over here. Obviously, that E1B1B is obviously very strong. That E1B he's not getting past that. He goes down into Samaria, right? And then he basically sweeps again over here, going through the Hittites, right? About the time of the Natufians, right? Just crossing them right above and then going down. Something happens and they're forced downwards. Even in the later time of Egypt, we know that later they're going to be forced out of Egypt. They're going to be forced down later on. But they go into this area and they dwell in the lower areas down here. Now, this is where they become the Chads, right? Chadic people, right? And what do they look like? What do the Chadic people look like? And there are groups, right? The Chadic people. But they're entering into a rainforest zone, right? They're entering into a rainforest zone. So the Chadic people, right? Their haplogroup RV88. We're going to see an RV88 come out. So the men in this group is RV88. So this Chadic group right here that you're seeing, that's in the areas of Africa, is going to go into these areas, right? Even Expresses is going to go down into these areas, the areas of Africa, right? It's going to have ties. Like, remember how we talked about it comes to the Umayyad culture over here, stops about there, and it goes into these areas, right? This is where it was coming from, the Isham. It's a massive, massive group that's coming down, and it's going to these groups. So see that V88? This is how it gets there. It goes down. It goes down because it couldn't cross these ones. It goes down, grades the top, just like E1B1A. E1B1A goes down into Africa at this time frame as well. And it goes upwards. It comes out of Spain and it's going to start dominating. Now, remember, it's going to be on this side and it's going to be on this side. Now it's going to try to, use its strength there. But this is going to be R1A and also R1B. So R1A comes from a little higher with that Isham group, and R1B goes a little lower around this way. I don't know if it's coordinated, but it does happen that they sweep around like this. And they kind of flood in this area, because that's when you're going to start seeing other Indo-European groups come in as well. But this one's going to be a very important powerhouse that comes in. So very important. You can see at the early stages, remember at the early stage, we didn't have it R V88 over here. So you can see right here, not even down here, we have that R group yet, but we get the R group that comes from over here. See that R1A and R1B? So they're going to go and they're going to make their way down here. So you can see they're not over here yet. They're not in this time. They got some C's here, H's, I's, right? Obviously some E's, because remember we talked about that, how E shot out and it got to here, it got to here, and it got to here. Remember that culture again? Let me show it one more time real fast. So remember Cauldron culture, right? That Cauldron culture comes out from the Levant. And again, it has E1B1A, right? It lets you know that it's obviously arrived from the Levant, right? Older Neolithic culture, you can see obviously was already there, right? But that's how we know this is not a Japhetic line, but it does move to some of the areas. But you can see obviously have MT DNA of some European female lineages, but the Y DNA is E1B1B and some C groups and other groups. So obviously they got E1B1B in that culture. But that's what it's doing. It's moving from the Levant into these areas and have ties of these areas. So that's very important to give us a picture of what's going on there. And the fallen angel be that of the Neanderthals and Denisovans. I don't know. Now, this is a great question. Let me just pause for a second to answer this question. So we know that Neanderthal. Let me just also show it while I explain it real fast what you're saying, because that's a great question. Could it be, right? Could it be Neanderthal and Denisovan have a Y chromosome that no one today has? And I'll show you exactly what Y chromosome those are, just so everyone knows what exactly chromosome is a Neanderthal and what exact chromosome is a Denisovan. We got a couple different papers that would tell us. There's a paper that was done by Asian scientists, pretty much, that basically put it down. So right here is where he writes it. He puts basically A with 4 zeros, A0000 is Denisovan. And A with 3 zeros, A000 is Neanderthal haplotype, right? Because it's in comparison when we look at, the modern said atom, which is A00, right? So just to kind of get a look at that, this is that paper right here. It's going to be a study right here at the Center of Medical Genetic, right, at this laboratory at the School of Life Science, university. So they basically tell us that they have a different Y chromosome than anyone today. Does that mean that they are angels? I don't think that they're angels. Not A000 and A0000. The reason why is because they also autosomally connect to humans. When I say autosomally, I mean like previous connections, not like a totally separate connection. But there is fossils that I did find that they could not pull any genetics from. It didn't have any haplogroup. And that most likely probably was the fallen angels, because they could, it happens a lot, that they'll find ancient lines, wiped out lines of people that they cannot pull as haplogroup. So it's possible. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that there's no doubt, but I'm saying by the facts of science, there is possibilities that there are groups of those fallen ones that might mix with humans. And it's even possible that it's still happening. Right? It's even possible that it's still happening. Just to get an understanding of it, it's definitely possible. But just to get a full understanding of the picture, because we are in the days of Noah. Literally, the scripture says it. We're in the days of Noah, right? Satan came down during the time of David to tempt David, right? We know that these things happen throughout all time, right? It never says that he stopped or they stopped, right? So that's something also to know, that sometimes things fall every day. So it's definitely possible. But I believe it could even be that A00 might be that add-on, and maybe that's how that connection is going on. A00, A000, and A0, right? It might be, but that is a wiped out line. Those lines are lines. Those A0000 with the 4 zeros and 3 zeros, those are wiped out lines that no one has today. But yeah, that is an interesting thought. That could they be close to something like that? That's an interesting thought. Amen. That's right. I believe that they became one with Israel. I do believe that too. I believe that. I believe that they were definitely one with Israel. I agree. I believe so. Why not? Right? They're the sons of Abraham. And you can see right here, obviously R1A and R1B, right? They want to move in. Now that we got like a picture of that, going back to over here. So remember, they became in the Umayyad culture, went into these areas before they even go over here and become the Bell Beakers. Because the Bell Beakers are actually going to be, before that, E groups. They're actually going to be some E groups. But here's Here's a actual geneticist who plot down all the fossil finds. So he just puts down the R1B within this time frame, but they go into Africa, as you can see. E1B1A is actually younger than the oldest R group that's in Africa, right? The oldest R group is about 4,800, and the oldest E1B1A is about 4,000 years before present, which this one's about much older than that. So that just also lets us know the age, the youngness of that E1B1A group. Remember, it's younger than obviously D, which got into it with the split before R was even made, which was that K2. So now the R is over here coming downwards, obviously settle in these areas, becoming some of the, obviously understand when I say this, Arabian groups, but they themselves wouldn't be Shemitic Arabian, but they would later speak Semitic. A lot of people over here speak Semitic, a lot of them. That doesn't mean they're originally Shemites. They can pick up just like someone who's Hamite can be speaking Indo-European, right? I can show you A groups over here that's Indo-European. That's why the Hittites became speaking Indo-European, because the A groups were mixing with them earlier than other groups. They were over here earlier mixing with some other groups, some of the A groups, A and B, some of the A groups. I don't know about the B groups. I found A groups that were mixing with some of the Europeans over here. And that's just very important to understand. If you haven't seen that, I showed that before with this paper that, just like I pointed out how E1B1B or E1B1A went overseas, is on that same paper. On that same paper that points out basically A groups were all in these areas. So now remember that R went down here, is going up. Now we want to notice, because this area, E was here, right? Remember, E is over here, E is over here, and E is over here. So remember, E was a strong power stopping this group from passing them. That's going to be very important, because E already, remember, I showed you Natufians were already fighting from the Natufian time frame before they even got copper tools. The reason, and this is why I say copper age, bronze age, iron age is so important, because I do believe, because people were going at it and because different societies were competing, it caused them to keep upgrading their gear, right? You see that a lot in types of video games where they have an upgrade system, right? And that's what it was like. It was like an upgrading system where they would upgrade, and the kings will obviously have a lot, not just the strong soldiers, they would have all the riches, right? The found gold and jewels and stones, and the trade systems will be connected to them, right? Leading to them. And they have a connection to a lot of places. But now you see this is very important. So this is where R1B is. So let's go back to over here. Now we got that consciously understood. At this time, there was no R. Then all of a sudden, the transition happened. And then boom, 6,000 BC, we get from under here, that R went down there, and then boom, right in the LA, how do you say it? I'll probably say that weird. Almagra pottery, right? You can see all of a sudden you get the exact E1B1B88. That's not yet. What's important is that's not the one that's still in the areas of over here. That's not this one. That's not this one. This is actually the R-M269. That's different than V88. They're going to be different branches. Let me just show that real fast about why that's important. Because it's just like E1B1B and E1B1A. Obviously, R groups are all R groups. E groups are all E groups. But it's a little different. The reason why it makes a difference, because it also tells us the time frame. It gives us the time frame, and it will tell us about the culture and everything, and the pottery, right? Because these groups, certain groups come in and dominate a little later of those things. Let me grab this little tree here. I haven't went to this little tree in a while, but I want to show you a tree that I thought was okay, which I probably find it typing it down, but I'll just grab it on here. Shouldn't be too hard to find. I just want to show you it, just to kind of make the connection of these groups and whatnot. Right here. All right. So let me just basically point it out. I think it's this. No, this is one for E1B1. This is about E groups, not this one. Let me grab it. Almost at it, because I want you to kind of see this split, because this actually makes a fairly detailed difference in a way. It makes a fairly detailed difference in a slight way because V88 again gets there earlier than your R-M269, right? They're gonna be majorly different in how they are coming about. I could probably just type it down. Let me just type it down. It's not too hard to find a branch of our tree. There are B. All right, 98. All right. Let's see. It shouldn't be too hard to find a tree. Just to make it clear. All right. This one is okay. This one is okay. All right, here's one that's better. Okay, so here's how it goes. So these ones are R1A. Obviously, R are related. R1A, R2 are related. But notice there's going to be a branch from this one R1B. From R1B, right? This is going to be R1A, right? R1A is connected with R1B. R1B, this is the root of R1B, and then underneath is going to be a subclades, right? Just like how E1B1A has a root, R1B1 is the root of all our lineages. They're going to be the root of it. But it makes an early split. It changes. And let me just show it. The reason why, because we're going to also point out with the E groups, they have something like that too. But watch, you can see right here-ish. Let me see if I can zoom in on it just to kind of point it out. Right here. All right, so let me point out what's going on here. See right here, that M269? There's a split right here at P25. V88 goes its own directions, and then M269 goes its own direction. So these are going to be different than these ones. That's important. But they're obviously going to be family, right? They're going to be family, but they're going to be different, right? Here it is again with that R1A, right? It's just showing basically because they added a branch to it that separates it for this V88. The V88 is different than M269. Remember that. V88 different than M269. It's going to be very important. So V88, this one's going to be that M269. Remember, it's right here coming out, right? It's making a move. And a lot of them are in some very interesting areas, right? You can see, right, this one, right at the top of there. One's going to be at the top. One is going to be obviously pretty much around these in these areas besides this center area that we just talked about that is not in that center area right there, where we do have an E1B1B right here. So that's very important. So right around some of these areas here, right around some of these areas in this area, right? That one too. Why is that important? Because we also you got to know R is Japhetic, but it's going to go at it with some lineages, and it's going to make a major difference with the J group, right? It's going to show you the difference between it and the J group and the E group. Now, all of a sudden, in the Chaldean time frame, something happens, right? This area is dominated, and the E group is removed. That's important. That lets us know that E group that was removed from that area. And remember, before that, we also got to know that there were A groups here as well. But they left out early, Mesolithic, Paleolithic time frame. They're going to be out of that area. The E group is going to be the Shemitic group that comes in, but it's moved out because it's filled with those R groups, right? Remember we just seen, right? At first it had RV88, but then there's going to be another R group that comes in. This is a different R group that actually comes in right here. This R group is going to be a different R group. And it's going to be different than your V88. That's now in this area. So you can see, in this area, you got your R's increasing, and also your E1B1B, right? E1B1B is in this area and this area. Just like we talked about before, it was still in this area. It's also over here, So it's gonna be in this culture here. Scroll up a little bit. So you can see you got this one and then you got this one. So this culture right there will have an E1B1B right in this culture. And also you will have in this culture right here, right, just to make it clear, you can see in the Cauldron culture right here. Now remember, in this time, there's some J groups that dominate this area. And so there's obviously a lot of J's up there as well. But you got to remember the monophyletic family CF is one. But here you got those E groups in this area. So they were in this area, filling this area here, and this area. So now they're filling all these areas. E1B1B, filling all these areas. But they've been moved a little bit from this area for this time frame. For this time frame, they've been removed from the area real fast. So that's very important. But we do still have some in this culture over here, right here. So we have some in these two cultures here and these areas. So that's where E1B1B is in this time, right? Let's move to another stage, right? So you see that P297. So some other groups, some other R's moving around. That one's up here. Why is that important? Because they're gonna flood they're gonna be the new said European. Because at first the European line, remember, at this time the European line is I groups. I is the Indo-European line with J, which I and J was one. So I is a major Indo-European line at that time. So they're one of the major ruler in Indo-European line. But then again, you can see the Levant still having control of those Indo-European lines. And then you see over here, all the way over here, obviously still E1B1B, right? Nothing too much changed in this time, but you still just have those R lineages, right? And then your E1B1Bs in certain areas, right? That's 5,000 to 4,000 BC. Then we go down, then we go to the Copper Age, right? That's that R lineage spreading all these areas, right? And then you got E1B1B, right, over here. But what happened in this area, we're going to see something kind of interesting, kind of change. Megalithic, something happens. It's really interesting that G is also Indo-European, and it chooses sides with the I, and they push out the E group. I don't know what happens, but now we realize the E group is pushed out of these areas. In a megalithic time, we see the E pushed down. But then that R that's down there is with that E group. And that T group is also working with that E group. Because if you know about the Gosulian culture, the Gosulians have that T come in the Levant with the E group. And they go into Africa. If you've seen the Nubian papers of some of the groups that went down there in the Neolithic time, they would have some of those T groups, early T groups that go down there. I can show a paper for that, but let's just keep talking about E. And you see the E groups will be over here, right? They're going to be basically sitting on the edge right there, right? Being forced down, right? But it looks like the T may be picking sides too. And then over here, obviously, you get a growth of that. Some of this L23, that's R M267. Why is that important? Because that's what I'm talking about. It's gonna be a change that's gonna happen, and it's gonna be important for the coming in of the Acadians in certain groups. So right there, RL23, right? That's a subclade of M269. So that's very important. Let us know that time frame, and then let us know that that's what's there, right? So now we got a good understanding that this subgroup is taking off in the north, and we got the arrows there. So this is taking off, it's doing some dominance. And then J apparently says, you know what, I'm going to do some dominance too and start going downward. So these two Japhanite lines spread to these areas, and they're pushing, right? And that one was not, it didn't go in the north at that time, right? But it's gonna make some movements into the Levant at a certain time, which it already was there. And also notice who else pops up in the Levant, right? After that E was pushed down, he pops up back in the Levant, right? He pops up in the Levant. Already got some of those RV88 with them. So they got some of the RV88, and they got those G, H, and T groups there. That's going to be there, right? Having some connections that's going to be in the areas of the Levant. And also, we got some E1B1B still in this area, but notice that what's the R doing? See the dots there? It's letting you know that it's trying to take some of these areas. So the R is starting to come in, settle in these areas, and the E1B1B is still there, right? Still in these areas. But we start to see, these areas look like they're getting more, less E1B1Bs in them. So you can see not that much E1B1Bs up there. Then we go into another transition, 3,000 to 3,500, 3,000, right? And it's just talking, again, fossils that's found with copper equipment, right? So copper age evidence, you can see they're pushing, right? The EV13 still is going to be in this area, right? It's going to be obviously still holding in this area here. You can see now, if we look at some of these areas here, it doesn't look like E1. Now, E1B1B is still here, actually. It's going to be in these areas. Is also in, I'm going to point this one out, megalithic. So now, because that E1B1B, we know that it pushes up with that RV88. So look at, still with that T and that R and that E1B1B. Note those. Remember, we said who was on teams? I and G, right? I and G are on teams, and then R, E, and T are on teams. You're going to see these actually kind of go at it. See those funnel beakers? E1B1B is going to go into those funnel beaker area, right? Funnel beakers. We talked about that just recently when we was talking about E1B1B that went into some of the areas of the funnel beakers and everything that basically kind of changed how that group stands and everything, right? We had talked a little bit about that real fast, kind of pointed out real fast on here just to show it again, right? Is when we was talking about some of the Natufian movements and everything, and the person that was working on some of the papers had found something kind of interesting. Let me actually point it out. Not here, but right around this area, actually up here. Let me point that out right here. All right, so look what he says here, because we're getting close to so it's gonna get to 3,000 to 2,000, and that's where we're gonna get when they come up here. So remember, we already see E1B1B is in this area here, so they're here. E1B1B is here, right? They're now here, and they're bell beakers with the RV88, right, with the T group, and E1B1B also with the RV88 is in the Levant, right? And they're also in Mesopotamia again. So they're now back in Mesopotamia. So they're in Mesopotamia, and note the time frame, 3,500 to 3,000, back to Mesopotamia. So you can see right there, right? And then also in this little area here, Badan culture. So right here and here is E1B1B, right? And we know that in the 6,000, we know we found an E1B1A around this area, but we're just focused on E1B1B today. E1B1B was in this area, and we see that it also filled this area. And it's going to be important. It's going to now get a problem with that culture there. For example, watch what this individual had wrote about the funnel beaker samples and whatnot. Right, here comes the RV88, and then the E-78, and then a J1 and a T, right? When they was actually moving around and everything. Watch what it tells us here about that culture. It says the African admixture was not found in the Mesolithic time, so we know it wasn't there in the Mesolithic, but now it's going to pop up in the Neolithic, right? But shows up in high frequencies in the late Neolithic pottery culture, just before the Proto-Indo-European invasion. So that's important. The corded ware are the Indo-European invasion with that R group that also had some of those L3 groups and whatnot. And that's gonna be important when we note that, when we see what's going on there. So he's giving an insight to these things. And this pretty much, this is the owner right here. If you know, you can see his profile, right? Just to get a little idea of some of his work. He has an academia account, right? You can see about me, and you can see his account. You can see his profile right here. He also has a genetic site. So this is where you're getting a lot of these genetic studies from, right here. So he got some published papers and everything. And you can see right here on ResearchGate, obviously, having to bring out some of his papers as well in there, getting some the geneticists to look at these things, right? Just to show you who's saying some of these things, right? He knows what he's saying. So let's go to the next time frame. So again, remember E1B1B in these areas here, right? We can tell in the megalithic right there with the V88. And then all of a sudden it changes. Boom, look at now. Remember, he was talking about the Indo-European invasion. Here comes the corded ware culture. They are now making an invasion into these areas. The other ones are also fighting with other groups, the R1As. They're, for some reason, they're taking off too, taking a lot of dominance in these areas. Look at the R1As jumping over, corded ware jumping over on these sides. And remember, they weren't there at first, right? They were kind of over here. And notice there was no R1As there, besides kind of over here in this global area right here. So the R1A just kind of over there. But then they do a push and they expand and they're pushing into these areas, They're taking some of these areas, see the dots there, and they're pushing into these areas and a lot of these different areas. So the corded ware is taking off, and the R1B also is pushing into these areas. So they're taking off and they're pushing. About this time frame, 2000 BC to 2500 BC. So Bronze Age, bronze gear, evidence of bronze tools being used, right? That's going to be very important. And notice we got obviously in the megalithic time frame, we already know that was an E1B1B in that time frame, right? And then the bell beakers obviously have your E1B1B there, right? And then you can see some of the, in this area in Greece, right? Obviously E1B1B in this area. So they're obviously in these areas, in this area and whatnot. In the Levant, E1B1B in the Levant and Mesopotamia, obviously, with some of the R groups. Now they're getting next to those M2, M260, R269. And they're going to be connecting with them. And that's going to be important a little bit for what's going to happen as we move forward. So that's very important. So obviously the core Araxes culture is like your Indo-European culture, right? It has your T's, your L's, your J's, your G's. Classic Indo-European culture that stays here for a long time, right in the center, that area. Now in this time, we get that R group going in. Now remember, this was a different R. This is important. It's not V88. This is not V88 that's coming in there. This is a different R that just came in. It's going to be pushing and changing the environment. So remember, it was growing into the bell beakers. We don't know what exactly happened with that V88. It was there. They must have went at it, and something happened, and they were not the successful or the highest power there, but they're still in the Levant. V88 is still in the Levant, but they do not make it with these Proto-Indo-European ones, these other ones that come in that are going to be more dominant. So obviously the E1B1B is still in Greece right here. They're obviously in the bell beakers, right? They're going to be in the bell beakers. And there are going to be some invasions that's happening in these areas with these other R groups, right? Obviously E1B1B in the Levant and Mesopotamia, right? So E1B1B, Levant, Mesopotamia, long time, right? Now we got the 2000 to 2500 to 2000 BC. So this is gonna be very important because also over here, remember we had E1B1B and the Mesolithic and the Levant and the Akkadian time frame. All right, so now that we got the Akkadian time frame, let's also understand something about the whole map. Let's get a good understanding of the whole map of these things, right? So we know that E is a important lineage, but it does reach pretty far away. Let me actually think about this. Oh, is that there? Up here. All right, so let me show something real fast of where E is that's not on that design there, but he does chart some of the other fossils of E. So we're gonna go to over here. So remember, we're now in the Bronze Age, but let me first show a map of the Neolithic. So here's the Neolithic. And I'm going to quickly, before we get back to that one, let's go to Y chromosomes and look at where is those E groups around this area. Okay, so this is ancient times. This is going to be Neolithic. Notice we got that E group over there, right? You can see E groups in these areas right there. There's E group down there, right at the bottom. Let me make sure the screen is cleared. E dash that's basically E2, E-M454. I think that's E2. Most likely they're going to be early Shemitic lineages. Early Shemitic lineages. It could be any Shemite, one of those Shemites. It can even be, you can even have early mutations that, these mutations are always subjective. How fast do they go? How slow do they go? Right. But that's something that's important to know. That is most likely a Shemite. There was also E1B1A, and that's interesting. If you get some if you get that paper, definitely share that. That is very interesting. It probably is. There's directly markers from Natufian, from all. Yep, that's right. A lot of the Jewish populations do have a lot of those E groups. It's high in the Jewish populations, as we see. It's high in the Levant. Is there evidence of Hittites or any? Yes. Well, yes. Hittites as A groups. I have a paper that kind of connects that together. Well, maybe we can look at that afterwards. Maybe we'll make a video and just kind of put that together for A groups. But yeah, we do have some A groups that went into the Hittite and northern area. When the Hittites come in and take the Hittite area, when the Indo-European lines come in and take the Hittite area, it pushes the A groups out of the Hittite area. So that's also important to know that it was an invasion that had happened. But now let's look a little closer. So now this is just this side of the world, but there's obviously is a big world. We're gonna now go over to the other side of the world and see if there was an E over here. Because remember, now the Akkadian time came in, and if you don't know about the Akkadian maps, let me just put a map here to show you what the Akkadian map looks like. You want to get a map that has the full picture of the Akkadians, not a summary of the Akkadians. You see this picture right here? That's the full picture of the Akkadians when they reach all the way over here. The Akkadians go all the way past Elam and invade inside of Elam. That's very important. You can see right here the corner. Sometimes they put a little edge right there, but no, they actually go deep into that area, the Akkadians. And they're also very large. They're very large. They might be larger than people know. But you can see yourself that the Akkadians will be a very massive empire. Here's a decent one. I'll just leave it on this. Here is Elam, right? The Akkadians, look where they're coming from. They conquer these areas and they move into these areas because E1B1B is in the areas. Let's go back over here. Remember, it was going down over here, and then they had to get back over here. They had to get back over there because it was going down. They're slaying their own peoples. These Arlands is going down. The corded ware is taken off at the top. All types of areas are taken off. You can see even this culture is called battle axe culture, right? What type of culture is called battle axe culture, right? Think about that. That culture came in called battle axe culture, right? A little different in some of these other ones and whatnot. But battle axe culture comes in because it gets crazy. It gets pretty crazy what happens. But obviously there's a plan, right? Throughout all this, obviously Israel's still being prepared to be made, right? Because this is not yet the time that Israel comes out of Abraham. Very important. That's why we don't have an E1B1A that massive. We only have a small group of E1B1A. We find pieces because Arphaxad exists, right? Eber exists. All these different men exist, and they can easily have early mutations of E1B1A. There's no doubt that can happen from their sons or their children, like Jotanites. I already talked about that. Jotanites are literally would be still from E1B1. They can easily make E1B1A groups right from them. So that's very important. But we don't see a large group of E1B1A. We see a large group of E1B1B. That's more the Arabian lines. But we do see different snips of it. But let's look at it a little more careful here to get a little understanding what's happening at this transition here, because this is going to be majorly important for the Acadians. So see that Acadian Empire? So notice, we're going to have certain empires in this time, right? Proto-Shemites and whatnot, all those and whatnot. But then we get the transition of the Akkadians, right? Of the Akkadian Empire. Oh, I just did that. Of the Acadian Empire that's going to come in and kind of change the game right here. So right here, you're going to have some of them that's going to be settled here. And then Minoans as well, Minoan Creek, right? Minoans are going to be there. I don't know if this got Minoans right here. The exact Minoan, there it is right there. Indo-Europeans are Minoans, right? J and G and T. IJK is one family. But here we go right here. Here is what we want to see: Akkadian rise, the rise of the Akkadians. They're going to come from this area. So they're going to come from this area here. So you can see, to illustrate it, right? Remember the Hittites, by the name Hittites rise up too. After the transition of the Acadians and everything. So very important also to know, to look at it in detail. But before we look into that real fast, let's get a quick verification on this little design here. Let me go over a little bit and kind of show you what's going on here. So remember, this was the Neolithic, right? Not all the way over there. So this is the area I want you to pay attention to, about this area here. The reason why is because that's when you're going to start to see connections with E1B1B culture and things like that. That's going to have your E groups pop up. So notice what we see here. See J groups over here. We see G groups over there. So these are Indo-European lines. But notice we don't yet get E's over there, right? We don't get E's over here too early, right? This is Neolithic time frame, right? Just to kind of like make it clear. All right. So, but as we proceed in time, right? Early Epilithic, I'm just going to show this one as we proceed in time because we want to get to the Bronze Age. That's what we want to see. But just to show it again, Neolithic, just to make it clear, right? Is another transition time frame we was looking at, right? Go over here. So remember, these are Indo-European lines right here, even L, Indo-European. See it right there, ancient Armenia, right? Very important. So nothing around this area yet, right? Besides some Indo-European lines and everything, but no E's, right? Just to kind of make it clear that the transition of here is very smooth. I'm going to skip this one too because there's nothing there. There's nothing there. This is early copper age, just to kind of show it too in this copper age, right? Remember, we're going to the Bronze Age where they have bronze gear. That's how we know it's the Bronze Age. If they ever find bronze with them, then they announce it as Bronze Age because they have bronze gear. Okay, so a little bit over here. So again, Indo-European lines, right? You can see the T's, J's, G's, L's and whatnot. IJK is one family. Okay, so you can see just some R2s there and some J's, some G's over here in the Turkestan areas over here, right? Very early on, very, very, very early on, right? There's something interesting about this little area right here. You see this group? You see these two groups here? These two groups are going to be interesting, even this group, right? We already know that it has some Indo-European groups there, but we need to know when the Akkadian come in. So here it is, the Q's over there. These are going to be mixing. Their females are going to be mixing together. They're going to be becoming one. Notice what's over here. So BT is there, and J and H and P. And you see that they're mixing. These groups are mixing together in this little area. Kind of get a little closer there to see the pinpoint. I guess that's as close I get. But you see they're mixing. No E's there yet. So that those groups are going to be original Turkish far lineages. Umayya, that's just gonna give us some quick transition of some things of certain groups that were going at it. A lot of Indo-European groups that went at it. Just giving a little picture there. We're gonna skip that one. Hungary, that's just Hungary. We're gonna skip this one. This is that why the bell beaker is important because they're going to be obviously coming out right here. Proto bell beakers and certain bell beakers obviously have some E's and R's, and that's what we're just looking at, the transition, right? We're just looking at that a little bit up here for those bell beakers, right? So this is going to be where they come down, right? This is where they go up, and then you'll start seeing these stones right here. These stones start to be more used, and that's how you're going to start getting some of the bell beaker culture. That's going to be basically settling at the top, which is going to be right here. So this is going to be your said Bronze Age, so bell beakers, and this is what we was just talking about real fast before we get to right here, which is going to be the Akkadian when the Acadians come in. So right here and here, the transition of this. So bell beakers, right? Bell beakers. So bell beakers, you can see what's going on. That's going to get, now we're almost there. Now remember, corded ware, bell beakers, corded ware, right? There's going to be groups that's going to be going at it. They look like, it's almost like it's the same Y chromosomes because there are groups. So a lot of them are groups, but some of them are, what's the word I'm looking for? Not friendly with its other counterparts. So here, late copper, I'll just show you this before we jump into the Bronze Age. And the Bronze Age is going to paint the picture of what we're seeing here. Again, looking in the area over there, because that's the area we want to see. Right over here. So look, the cultures are growing over there. 1, 2, 3. Developing in this area. Right? But this is going to be far first Indo-Europe or Indo-Iranian. Now, look what we have here. All of a sudden, a E1B1B pops up. Right? This is right before the transition of the Bronze Age, right before the Bronze Age. Because at this time, we're going to have those Akkadian groups coming in, sweeping through the valley to develop the written records of the Akkadian groups that spread through these different areas. Because they don't just reach a small area, they reach a far area. That's very important. They reach very far into it. And obviously, as we go over records, we can go off of what we have in record, but always know there's always more stuff than we know in the records. But we do have evidence of an E1B1B coming over here. So you see that? So E1B1B, Chaldeans came over there from these areas, right? All right. So, and remember, that's why it's so mixed, because the madness that was happening at that time. Now let's go to the Bronze Age, early Bronze Age. Now we can see what was going on, right? Are we going to see that E vanish, or are we going to see it end up developing? Because we only got to see one side with some things. But now it's good to see the detail of these things. Mention, yeah, that's a good question, when finding out these exact pinpoint subgroups. Mostly we know what's Helm, Shem, and Japheth. We can kind of start breaking them down to exactly what they are, like what exactly they are. So you see that M269 up there. So that's going to be a newcomer. M269 is taking off up there, taking off from areas that were with the E1B1B and B88 branches. Very important. All right, so over here, note that E1B1B, M34. A lot of Ashkenazis have M34 and M35. A lot of Ashkenazis have a lot of M34 and M35. So this actually shows where they were linking together. Because these subgroups, you can find also J's here. You can find a lot of other groups that's going to be mixing together. So kind of zoom out to show where it's at. So that's going to be good for the Acadians when they come in. They already got some ties to people that's already connected with over here close to the BMAC culture. So you see what's going on there? Get a good little understanding, right? If you know about the BMAC, right? BMAC culture right there. So very important, let you know that some of the E groups were developing in the BMAC culture right here. So you can see over here, they're getting some developments over here for the development. All right, so let's go over. So E1B1B in that time frame. And again, the Bronze Age, because some of these papers, you're not going to see that where they're at. But this is how you see where they're at on the whole tree, the whole picture. There's E2s out here. There's E1s out here. We can pull the fossils. We got fossils of them, of E1s and E1A and E2s that are up in this same area over here, around this area. A lot of E groups develop over here, all the way to Pakistan and India. E1B1B is still over there. So developing, very important, and that's still Neolithic. I mean, that's Bronze Age. It's gonna be Bronze Age here, right? Bronze Age time frame, just to show that when we go over the pictures of the Bronze Age. One more time frame. That's Middle Bronze Age, and then the end of the Bronze Age, because next is gonna be Iron Age, but that's when the Israelites come. Israelites, you want to look for Iron Age evidence. Iron Age evidence. But if you want to find his family, like Shemites, Bronze Age and Neolithic, it's going to be great to find some of those things. All right, so over here, back to that area, just to take one more view of those groups that was over here. Right? So there it is. E1B1B. It dwells in a lot of these areas, even upper coasts. So E1B1B up there. All right. So E1B1B over here. So E1B1B, that was over in this area. So that's important. So we do get developments of E groups over here, as well as we had them over here. And we had some over here, but they're pushed out, they're dwelling over here. So that's very important. So E groups stretching all across these areas. Well, again, looking at the Akkadian map, right, you can get a good understanding of that. So coming from these areas and dwelling in these different areas around here and having a major dominance in these areas, but it majorly developed around Mesopotamia and Levant, right? Because that's where E was developing in Mesopotamia and Levant. Now let's look at this picture now that we got an understanding of how the Akkadian culture is there and stretching across these areas. And what's the lineage now that we see there? Because remember, it's all mingled, right? Because, even if an empire takes over an empire, that doesn't mean that it just quickly and massively produce many males, right? We can't say that once it defeated empire, yeah, the Acadians have E, but they all are mixed. They all are mixed pretty much, but the dominant lineage is going to tell us what's going on. Now we can see this whole side. We can see some changes here in this one and this one, and this one. There's E groups. So E1B1B and these two groups right here. So they got some connection to Proto-Slavics and stuff like that with other Indo-Europeans and whatnot. That's probably why you get some of the Slavic, because the mixing of the languages and everything and the different cultures. So they're going to be all in these groups and everything. Very chaotic area it was at first and everything. So Bronze Age. And then we get in Iberia, in this area, obviously E1B1B. So E1B1B in the areas of Iberia here, and this culture here. So E1B1B. And then obviously in the area where you have the Kassites and the Akkadians, right? Because the Kassites just took the area of the Akkadians. With you have Mitanni coming in, you got the Kassites coming in, you got the Hittites, right? Indo-European Hittites that developed. Hittites obviously in the European lines, but they also have remember I talked about that E1B1B that was actually going to be connections of the Hittite area of the original how you say that, Lydia. They have connection to Lydia because they're here, but they have connections over here. So they like have some ties a little bit. But they themselves are going to be a branch not originally of those Hamites, the A and B Hamites. They're going to be the Shemites, the E Shemites that go and set up in these areas. They also become the Akkadians, right? And they end up being settling in areas with the Hittites, some of the Kassites and Mitanni, even in Mitanni. But they become lighter skin. But we got to know which ones, even though they bleed into these cultures, which ones are actually those cultures, because even E1B1B is in the Levant. The real one that's Mitanni is those J groups. Because remember, we already seen J forming into another power, because while I was talking about R, J was doing something else. So R was over here pushing into these areas, trying to get into these areas, right? Trying to get over here. But remember, one went down and one came out of here. And then they end up, pushing into these other areas. But then J was becoming a powerhouse over here. So you can see it's going to here, it's becoming the Minoans, right? They're going and becoming the Minoans. J has sealed this area, right? They sealed these areas as well, right? And obviously got connections to these areas. So that's important. And obviously J stretches all across these areas because that's going to be a Japhetic line and goes to other places. So it obviously has connections with Italy and all these areas and everything. So it's going to be very important. And then we had to, that's why I see how it says Hittite Lydia. So Lydia is E1B1B. Lydia is E1B1B. The Hittites is the Indo-European group that comes in, that R, G, J that comes in. But just to quickly show, let me just bear witness of how we got A groups are, and they're Indo-European, right? Let me also type this down. All right. I'm just gonna show you real fast what ancient Carthaginian looked like or was, real fast, just to show that A groups were the original Hittites, the original Hamites, just to kind of give an understanding on. Let me point that out. Original Hittite Hamite. All right. Let this note pop up real fast. Click this when it opens. All right. Now let me show you who are the real Hittites. Because remember, A and B are the Hittites. A and B are the Hittites. So remember we talk about some of these cultures, the bell beakers and whatnot. It's going to be talking about real fossils. Real fossils. All right, so let me show you what we have here. All right. Here's one, but that's one that goes overseas. Let me go to another one. Here's one. Where is this one? In Argentina. And a lot of times those A groups really spread out. So this one's really far. This one's going to obviously be an area most likely. What is it? South America right here. So they go really far, right? Bronze Age. They go across the seas. We know that because remember the Chaldeans were original Hamites, but they did get some of those mixed in with them, just to kind of give an understanding of that. And it's going to be an A group, and that's going to be about Bronze Age, right? 18, 19. Well, that's modern day. To be honest with you, that's modern day. Let's go to a fossil, so we're not looking at modern day ones. That's modern day. That's why you want to be careful in those dates. Make sure it's BC time frame. This one's BC. This one's in Africa. I'll just put it down real fast just to show where it's at. This obviously will be your early African lineage, right? We'll talk about the ones that were fighting with the Natufian and everything. This is probably it, right? Obviously having connections to it. I don't know where it's trying to take me. I'm pretty sure this is Africa. Here, I'll copy it real fast and just put it down to kind of show where it's at. Africa should be, yep, right there. So E1, obviously A groups in Africa. So that's like Neolithic time frame and everything. And that's one piece. Now that we know that A groups are going to be those African groups, Kind of gives us an understanding for forward. Let's go to another one. Here's another A group. Where is it? Look at that U5 in France. Look at that long time ago about Natufian time frame in France. Because if you look up the Phoenicians, right? If you look up the Phoenicians, right? Look at this, the Carthaginian. You can see right here. There's a lot of places that put down the results. I'm going to go to one where it just got exactly it. Carthaginian U5, ancient Carthaginian. There's a lot of different papers that have it. I'm going to type male. Here it is. Well, this one talks about Europe more, say. This is not the one I want to show. There was a paper that came out of the find of a male from Carthage, and he had U5. Let me see at the bottom here. I don't want to take too long with it, but I'll find it real fast. Let's see. Because I'm trying to make it hard. Okay, tonight. All right. I'm pretty sure I probably got a paper of it, but there is a direct papers that talk about it, that it is exactly U5. We did a video on it. We did a video on what exactly it is that is U5, but just I guess make it simple. Let me see. I probably know by the picture of what he would look like. They'll probably have a quick picture of it, I'm thinking, or they're just trying to make it harder to find nowadays. All right. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. There is evidence of a man of Carthage, right? During the time of the transition of Rome, while they was fighting. There it is, the picture. I knew it just by it. That's what it looks like. Oh no, I want to see this little. But this is what it is. This picture somewhere is somewhere, and it'll tell you about the U5 that he has. Right, you'll see it with this picture, and it'll U5 that they found in them. I don't know if this will have it, but this will be one of those how do you say Canaanites. The reason why that's important because the one that I'm going to show has that same mtDNA lineage. Because a lot of times you'll see that the Hittites were Indo-European, and technically Indo-European is a language, and anyone can technically be way Indo-European, technically, right? Not that they can be Japheth by default, but they can be Indo-European. So you can see right here, obviously Lebanese having connection with France and all that and whatnot. Talks about all that. Let me see if this has it. Here it is. You see right there. The finding provides the earliest evidence of European mitochondria haplogroup U5, right, in North Africa, and talks about all these things and whatnot. One of those things. So remember, U5 is going to be the one that was found with the Canaanites or the Phoenicians, just to get technical. Okay, so you can see right here is an A with a U5, about the same. That's the same subclade. So it's like U5B2. That's the same subclade, U5B2B. That one's U5B2C, right? So a kind of change of a SNP because we obviously see it's older, but look at that. That's a U5B2, right? That's a U5B2. And that's important because it's also with those I lineages of the Cheddarman, right? Cheddarman apparently start linking with those A groups. And remember, if you look at the early fossils of let me open up this thing again because, in fact, I'll go back on here, right here. If you look at the fossils in the land switch, the I came over here. So you see right here, you see that I2? So apparently the A group, which made it with the same female Hittites, because right here it's going to be later Hittites that come there with different females, but they're going to have that U5. That U5 that you see in these upper lineages, they have that U5 as well. See a U5 over here. You can see the U5 over here, and these going to have a U5 over here. So you can see U5 actually would be that Indo-European lineage that apparently that A group got with and was born of. It obviously from France, and look at that year, right? We're talking Natufian, early time frame, right? Pre-Natufian time frame, right? Very early on, right? And that's why we know that a lot of them were fighting because they were living at the same time, but obviously had different opinions on things, and they weren't having a good time together. Well, real fast, and obviously, remember I told you IJK was one. There's IJK in Germany. IJK in Germany said 5,000 years ago. Tell them to explain that why IJK is one, right? You're obviously LT is one, but IJK is one. IJK. Remember that. That showed you IJK in Germany as one fossil, as a real fossil. This paper that I'm showing you is a very rare find that I found that is sometimes used to clear up different finds and stuff, which obviously has your Gosulians, right? With your T groups and your H groups. Remember I was talking about that your H and your T groups was in the Levant first with the E. That's the Gosulian culture in Jordan, right? Gosu, right? Gosul culture, Gosulians. That's why they call Gosulians, because they're in the area of Gosul. So go down a little bit. Obviously, just some E1B1Bs around areas of Armenia, right? Obviously, spreading around, testing the areas he is. E1B1B in Israel. What time? You can see, obviously, the Natufian time frame. E1B1B in a female mtDNA to note. Here's your A. That one's in Czech Republic. That one's a long time ago. That's probably why it's Indo-European, because look at that. That's even predating. That's gonna be predating your how you say Natufian. So that A right there, and this A up here, not that one. This one. These two. Look at the dates on these two. These two dates are enormous, but they are in areas outside of Africa. So those are some Indo-European lineages that will be outside of Africa because they got U lineages. So that one got U5, that one got U, right? And those are going to be obviously your A lineages. Very important to note. Here is obviously A's will be in areas of Africa, right? But I just wanted to show you that A has ties to Indo-European, right? A's have ties to Indo-European, right? That's one of the older E's, right? 5,000 or 4,000 BC, 6,000 BC, 4,000 BC, 6,000, 3,000. But remember, out of Africa scale, right? And that's just some other E's that's old, that's in some interesting areas, right? That's just a little island. I already pointed that out. That little island of France, little island of France. Just make sure there's no more A's here. I think there's one more I just saw. Here's another A in Great Britain, right? I talked about this. Some of the A groups even merged in the Bell Beaker culture. So that means some of in this time frame, there's actually A groups. There's actually A groups in this time frame, and this time frame right here, in the Bell Beaker culture. So in this area, Bell Beaker have A groups up there. That's important. A groups are in the Bell Beaker culture. Before we get to this one, So A groups in the bell beakers. So Great Britain, bell beaker, you can see about 2,300 to 2000 BC, and it's an A group. See what's going on there? So very, very important to get a look of these A groups that, not a lot of times people talk about. There's some BT groups in Germany, right? See what's going on there, BT. Obviously, I talked about that root, the IJ in Ukraine, right? IJ was one, IJK was one. IJ and IJK was one. One body, one family, one monophylactic group. Mono meaning one phylactic tribe. Look at that A again, bell beaker. You can see right there, the A with the H, right? That's a clearly an Indo-European line. H1 or H17A. That's gonna be a A with a Indo-European line. Chad's Republic, right? So that means at this time, this A group was not just in the areas of Britain, but it was also in areas of Chad's Republic. So over here. So you can see what's going on there. That's some stuff that people don't talk about. And here's another A that's obviously in Africa. That's a long time ago. We talked about that one, long time in Africa. And here's one A in Italy. Look at that, bell beaker again. Bell beaker, Italy, A in Italy, Sicily, bell beaker, 2,800 to 18 BC, A group. So they could indeed be the pushed out Hittites. They definitely can be, without a doubt, the Hittites that were originally here and must have made a trade with one of those Japhanites, and that Japhanite tricked them or defeated him and did not let him come back down there. And it was just not possible for those A groups to be a dominant lineage in these areas, because there was some a little bit, but then an Indo-European invasion happened with the Hittites in all these areas of Levant, and they became Neo-Hittites before the Israelites, right before the Sea People's invasion. So the Hittites changed, then the Sea People's invasion came because some people came from the north, attacked, then the Israelites came. But that's very important. A lot happened before the Israelites come there. A little more into it just to see if we got one more piece. Or here's one all the way in the areas of Portugal. A with a K group all the way in the areas of Portugal. You can see right here, Portugal, Spain, right? So right there in the corner of the edge of the world, right? At the corner of Europe, Spain, right? Some BTs up there in Germany, right? Got some groups over there in the area of Germany. Some other BTs in Poland, right? That's very important. So it just kind of gives us a kind of like a second view on them. That one's just one that's younger than the other ones, but is in Africa and with an L line. So even that one's outside of Africa older. Here's that P2. Here's directly P2. That's where your E1B1A actually comes from. The origin of E1B1A from this one from the Israeli area, the Natufian. That's gonna be an exact P2. That's where E1B1 comes from. In Mesolithic, Paleolithic, there's no E1B1A. It's in that P2. Belgium, right here, this long time ago. Belgium, right? Belgium, that's an A. Also, here's France and Germany, right? Long time ago. A's over here, France and Germany. Also, South Africa, obviously. A's in South Africa, right? France, Germany, Belgian, A groups. Indo-European, the original Hittites pushed out all into the upper areas, just to kind of make that clear. That is the A and B groups that are the Hittites, the ancient Hamites. It's the A and B groups. But before we dig in a little more to the next part of this, right, get into the history of Acadians, and these Amorites and Hittites were likely Make sure I put that on screen. All right, the indigenous Amorites and Hittites were likely absorbed by Caucasus Indo-European various groups in the mid-Bronze Age. There's also evidence of an outside population ruling several Levant. Yes, and that's absolutely right. I did a video, and we know that the Amorites are actually an Indo-European invasion. That's what makes it very important, that the Amorites are an Indo-European invasion that come into the Levant, but then they push out. But they do have some Shemites in them. That's important to know too, that they do have E1B1B groups in them. So that's just important to know that, because of a lot of the mixing, and obviously these are generations down, you're going to have a major change of the area. But that's absolutely right, that a lot of Hittites and Amorites, though in the biblical narrative they are described as Hamites, but it's also important to know that the original ones were Hamites, but then there were Neo-Hittites and Neo empires that come there. But the Amorites were, yes, a major group of the Indo-European invasion, technically. That's absolutely right. So now we see in the late Bronze Age, this is going to be the transition. So remember, Akkadians, right, come in and they take all these areas, E1B1B. And then we see all of a sudden those our lineages pushing down on them, right? They're pushing down on the Hittites. They push it down on the upper areas of the coast, right? But this time frame, we still got Akkadians, but they fall at this time frame. The Akkadian time frame falls from this transition of here. So just to point that out, from this time frame where we see that in the area where we would have Akkadians in Mesopotamia and Levant, we got E1B1B, no doubt. And we got to know which ones are the Japhetic line. So E1B1B can easily be Mesopotamian, Akkadian, Levantine, no doubt, because they exactly at the time when the Akkadians come in, they're there, and they're massive. And we know that they're different than these other lines. So you can see ours very, very powerful over there. So again, R coming in, you got your Mitanni, Hittites, right? You got certain cultures that's going to be settled up. Obviously, the Minoans, which again, Minoans will be that Indo-European group that settles there. I don't know if this points out what the Minoans are on this one. Probably not. But you see you obviously got some areas with different mixed companies in some areas, right? Obviously, Pontus, which Pontus should be right here. So Pontus has some E1. So see Lydia has E1B1B, and Pontus has E1B1B. So those are the Shemites. Pontus and Lydia, that's where the Shemites were. And remember, they end up going into these areas as well. So Iberian area, obviously E1B1B still there. You can see this one right here, E1B1B still over here. So E1B1B, E1B1B, E1B1B in these areas. So that's very important to know that they're going to be in those areas over there, right? Just to get a little understanding there. And then what we have, this is when we start getting closer to the age, why we see our lines as the strong Indo-European lines. Because Bronze Age collapse, they was that major power. They was that power that ruled these areas, became the Celts. They became the Germanic peoples, the Gauls. They were a massive power that merged with a couple of different groups. But they obviously, remember, they're going to be taking areas from the original ones that would be those. But you can see right here, Lydia, what do we have over there? You know, you're going to have certain lines in that area, right? Just to kind of like break it down. I don't know if this one has a deeper dive into it. But pretty much, you know, you can kind of get a taste. You can kind of get a taste for it all after all that. You can kind of get a taste. But you see at this time, obviously, that E1B, I mean that our lineage, R1A, obviously got this much control of a lot of areas, major, but they're Japheth. So if this is part of the IJK branch, that means this is Japheth, because we already got from IJK, right? GHIJK, HIJK, IJK, then IJ. We obviously surpassed the amount of evidence for Ham, Shem, and Japheth if we try to just make J Shemites and R Japhanites. If R is Japhanites, J is Japhanites, T is Japhanites, because IJK is one. But notice, like, they come from this area here, And I'm talking fossils, right? So they come in from this area. They're settling here. So V88. Let me open up this picture. Why is this important? Because remember the split. So there's a split here. V88 goes downwards. V88 is actually the R1 is kind of like, you know how you got your E1B1A C and you got your or E1B1A or your E1B1C and your E1B1B, which are different than E1B1A. And you got your R1B1C, which is different than R1B1A. You see, but they both come from R1B1. So you got your R1B1A, you got your R1B1C. Isn't that interesting? They kind of got like a same type of split type thing going on. But they do split, they go into different ways, different directions, and they conquer very differently. So you can see they're going to be spread into these areas, and then later on they spread into these areas. And in L2-1, they become that dominant European lineage over there. And remember, what was the first lineage that was dominant there? It was the I lineage. So remember, the I lineage was dominant there before the E lineage was there. So here's back to the origin of it. You can see, again, I over here, I over there, I over here, I's over there, lots of them. And then here's the R's coming in, like what's going on over here. And here's some other R's right in the middle here. So some here, and there's your I right there. So remember, R was not yet in the area of the Hittites, but it's going to come in and take these areas from these ones. That these ones are also Indo-European as well, that took it originally from the Paleolithic A groups that were there. So this is Mesolithic time frame. So things already changed by the Mesolithic time frame. G's over here, right? But R, you got some that settled there and some that's going to be working their way down. Most likely they had some ties with these ones, right? But then they're going to spread into these areas, right? And that's why we was talking about that the R went underneath. It wasn't yet there, but at that time, then it came to here, and then it filled these areas, right? Then it's gonna, and then the other subgroup of R comes R-M269, right? That was a different one that came in. So that was a different one because the other one came around from this way, but this one came straight down and then straight up and then straight over here and then back around through this way and here. It came through these areas and shot around. Actually, the last picture illustrates it nice enough right here. So they begin over here, they shoot out, so you can see, you get a little understanding. They begin as Isham, they come down actually pretty far away from over here, like they come far away, and then they come in and they sweep in and they fight with some of the E groups and everything. But then some of the other branch, this is just including M269 and V38. I mean V88 goes down and around here, but some reason they get destroyed by this R. This R comes in and the other one gets destroyed mainly by it. So this one pretty much sweeps through and conquers all these areas. And that's why this area is dominantly R. So you have major R groups in there that's going to be in that area. That's going to be ruling in those areas to get a good understanding of what's going on there. But we did have a lot of movements of E1B1B throughout that whole area. We had a lot of movements of E1B1B. But we got to also know about, time frame on those things. Which ones come in at which time frame and which cultures are hitting whom. So that's the oldest, remember, but that's not older than Isham, which is K2. So K2. So just thinking about that, think about that. Isham was a K2 before we even get E meeting R. Isham was a K2. That means before we even get an R, there's an Isham with K2, and we know D was over there going at it with them. And then they left from there. But then that R came down and took these little areas that you see here, and as these. And this also is nice too because it shows you the split. It shows you the difference between the V88, which goes down here and goes over here, and the R2M67, which goes in actually earlier. It actually goes in earlier, but for some reason, they don't go up. Some reason they sweep across here and they just basically stop there, or they come back. Whatever happens, they don't go up. It's probably why they call it the Pillars of Hercules, because probably some people were scared to cross it. Probably they was just scared to cross this. Probably heard that before, that some people call this the Pillars of Hercules. Probably that's one of the reasons. This early on, there's evidence that some came down and just didn't cross it. They just went back. But some came down and some came and crossed over. And then they went and settled in these areas. But this one came in and conquered these areas from this one, even though it seems it also has settled in some of these areas fairly early. So you can see right here, it's swinging in, it's taking these areas, sitting in these areas, it's going here. Some of them going down, like this V88, right? That's that branch right there that's going down, and then it goes up and goes up, becomes the bell beakers and settle in these areas, and it fills up the north pretty much from two directions, from multiple directions. It's coming in from here, going down and filling up these areas up there that are right, just to get a good transition of what's happening there, to get a good understanding there of what's happening. And remember, the Levant, as you can see in this picture, we already showed on a study on the Paleolithic time frame. That's when you want to, if you want to find where was A groups, look up Paleolithic to find its origins. Look up Paleolithic time frame. And right here, Paleolithic Y haplogroup heritage predominance in the Cretan highland plateau. Because if you know, that's where the Hamites came from. It says he called the Philistines from Crete, right? He called them from Crete. And this study actually reveals to you that they do know that by the said Paleolithic time frame, there was A groups over here. So you can see A groups were over here in the areas of Egypt, and they were over here in Crete. So they were over here in Crete, and they were over here in the areas of the Levant, A groups. Early on, and you can see is a different houses, different ones are here. You can see this early K group that would be here, early G groups, early G groups. Remember I talked about that. That's the Medianites. The G is the Medianites. You can see which groups will be around these areas kind of early. Get a good understanding on some of these things, which ones are stable in certain areas, right? You can see some branches come down, settle in that area, and kind of make a major difference. Obviously, the E groups settled in Syria, right? Syria, not in areas lower than the Levant at that too early, and early origins of Shemites settled in Syria, which this E group is in Syria. Not here, not here, not here. It's in the lands of Syria, right? And obviously, remember we talked about Lydia, right? Obviously Lydia, and then going off into these directions here. So you can see those E groups up there. Early E groups, Syria, connection, right? So very, very important to get an understanding of that. So yes, there's A groups here. There's E groups here in Syria, right? And your Japhetic lines are very large and powerful in the beginning. They were just everywhere, right? They would have moved with everyone, right? There would have been no one saying, no, you're Japheth, don't come with me. Even though Shem and Japheth was blessed by Noah, right? Shem and Japheth was blessed. You expect them to kind of make a movement together. No one was saying, well, you're Japheth at that time, saying, I want to walk with you. No. But there was a lot of groups that were moving together that had high ties with each other. You can kind of see what's going on there, just to get a full picture of that Paleolithic locations on there. So Paleolithic movements, locations for these. So that's where this came from, right? Talking about some origins and stuff, right? Very, very, very interesting. I'll put these in the description. This will be fossils of Egypt. You probably already seen it. I put it in the description like for 3 days now. But just to get some just to get the full picture, that's why I showed this little video, right? I was showing this little video the other day talking about this unknown culture that was over here. It was an unknown culture that was over here that had ties to over here, right? And I was telling you that was the E group. That the E group actually has ties to far areas like where the Romans are and all that, but they are going to be a Shemitic group that's going to be different than these other groups, right? And he's very aggressive on this thing. If you ever seen this you should definitely see this video. It's very when you see the Greeks connecting with these ones, the one that's over there is very aggressive. He definitely doesn't want anything to do with the Hittites. So you can see, getting a good understanding of these things. I guess just to like make it clear, this is, genetics is interesting, but it's not fair if you're not going to show the whole picture. If you're going to show a scrap of some things, it's no reason to even try to sell that he knows the origin. He does not know the real origin, that D is actually older than E, and that since DE split, and we know that D itself has evidence of Denisovan mixture, and also DE is going to have that evidence that the E and the D have a mutation of that YAP, so that wherever D is first found, that's where E was, because D and E split. D and E split, and the only fossil of D and E found is outside of Africa. There's no fossils of it in Africa, and this one doesn't have fossils because that's why he's using the Wikipedia information on this thing. He's literally copying and paste Wikipedia's information using modern information, and then he switched up and used some of that guy's stuff to just show this part of the land, and show how E did develop here, but actually E wasn't in the deeper parts of Africa like how he begins it. It doesn't begin like this. It does not begin here. It does not begin there. It begins over here. And in fact, over here, upwards and around Syria. E begins around Syria. E is Assyrian. That's important to understand. Assyrian is a Shemite. Is originally Syrian. That's originally what it is. E is originally Syrian, and that's why you see the Natufian begin here, and they spread here, and they spread upwards. And they develop a lot in the north, a lot in the north. So let me make sure we hit everything. So that's pretty much all I got for today. Just a breakdown and give you a picture of E1B1B, the full picture before the Akkadians come in and everything. And that's now, family. There's all other fossils. I can show fossils of people in the lands of India, BC time. I got a lot of BC fossils of E's in all around. A lot of E's, a lot of fossils of E's, all in these areas, right? And then D splitting from these areas. D fossils, evidence of D even around this area like this. D around this area, going all the way over here. But we apparently know D originally came from this area with Isham, came down, something happened, they split, and they went back down this way. That's what happened. This is actually the roots of D. D fossils are over here. They move downwards. There's like I don't know what it is, like a split. E ends up mostly going down here, settling over here, and mainly in this area. Later on, move into these areas, fight with a group that's here about 10,000 BC, and then they go up here. They leave from this area and they go into this area. That's why we was showing that one culture, right? When we talk about that one culture. I'm gonna close these because we don't need them now. I save that page, but that's all right because sometimes it's kind of hard, Acadians, to find those sources like that. And close this. So that's just important stuff. E and R and whatnot. Isham, right? That's important to know. Early Isham. Close that. Just closing some of these so it's not so confusing. So just to bring it all home and everything. So it's always important to know about the roots of E and D because we do have E branches even in Russia, right? You can see this little study from pretty much the studies of pretty much Russia, pretty much, and they have a study that knows that also pretty much E was up there in the areas of Russia and other places, whatnot. You can see right there, there's an E and there's a DE in the areas of Russia, upper areas of Russia. So that's what it is, a study of it. I'll put it in the description if you want. Someone wants to dive into it and whatnot. It's always a bunch of meat in these stuff. Let's talking post Neolithic and whatnot. So very, very important. So post Neolithic, that's obviously has to be Mesolithic, Paleolithic, DE found in Russia. So, and obviously, DNA split in the Middle East, right? phylogenesis that lets us know what are the actual movements of these things. As the Out of Africa idea has not enough proof. There's not enough proof in the Out of Africa idea, right? We have evidence of people mating with people outside of Africa, like D mating before the 30,000 wipeout of Denisovans. So at least before 30,000 in the time scale, we know that D was outside of Africa, right? There's no fossils of it inside Africa, older than the ones inside, outside. Okay, so that's pretty much it right there. That's the summary of the bronze, all the way from the Paleolithic to the Iron Age of E1B1B. That E1B1B does show itself to be Akkadian. It does show itself to be a Shemitic lineage and an Akkadian lineage. So, any questions? Let me know before we end it. With that, family, let me see what time it is. 3:11. I'm gonna end it at 3:13. So I'm gonna summarize real quick what we just learned. So the origins of E is from the Natufian area. They spread out this way and they spread out this way. We got evidence of the Natufian E being all the way about 30,000 years old, right? We got evidence of, and we have evidence of it being Semitic. So the Natufian Semitic E has evidence of it being, by Out of Africa scale, 39,000 years old. So if someone tries to say they were in Africa sooner than that, using modern people, because that's using the same understanding of modern people, it will destroy their concept. It will destroy it. And also the understanding of D being older than that E group. Also, the Natufian and the Iberasians have certain Indo-European lineage. You need to know that they are not going to be African. That's very important. They don't mix with some of the lineages that would be L to later, and L is not even African because L is Syrian. L3 comes from an ancient Tel after the Younger Dryas, which is Tel Halula. So it's very early on for those after the bottleneck of Y chromosomes. So that's very important. So obviously, remember, women were here all the way from Eve till all the way to the time of the flood, and those lines still show evidence that they have links to Eve, but the mutations that the men get with at the time of the ark would be what they have at that time as they got with them on the ark, right? And then they would get with, if they got with later females, like how Israel is recorded, they got with certain females, like the ones from Syria, then we have to know that those Syrians would be what they were, right? Because a lot of those E1B1As are with L3s and L lineages later on. But at first they were with those Indo-European, just to show that they were Indo-European. Not Indo-European, but yeah, they were in areas of Indo-European areas, but they were Shemites. But this culture is important to know about too. So we know about all those things and whatnot, that E1B1B is an ancient lineage and everything. So that's just something important to know. So I guess with that, that's all I got for now, family. With that, may you be blessed. May you be beloved. And always look out for those probably, most likely, your thought words, right? Because I think this person, he don't want to hear what I'm saying. But right here, right, he first uses the word at 1 minute and 50, believe, right? It is believed, but he doesn't talk about the Gosulians. He doesn't talk about the BMAC culture. He doesn't talk about the Natufians. He doesn't talk about the mix with the Denisovans. There's all types of stuff that's missing in this video. So just to kind of paint that, I know it took a little longer. I'm going to end it at 3:15 since I'm going to summarize it nice and smooth. The origin of you have to take papers and look at the real origin of it. No guesswork. Don't let no one say probably, maybe. Let them show you a fossil. Let's see the fossils, where they come from. But remember, D has autosomal mixed with Denisovans. So very important with those things. So with that, family, right, just from the end of this build, we have evidence that, yes, the Israelites can be those E groups. They show obvious signs of being Shemitic. So with that, family, that's all I got now. Be blessed, be beloved, and amen.